good morning, afternoon, or evening, and welcome to the Bloody Disgusting Network. The following show is just horrifying. Beware.
I've decided to scalp you and burn your village to the ground.
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking Malibu Barbie, we're talking white privilege and classicism, and we're talking, but Debbie, pastels? And I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we're talking one of the, the best Thanksgiving play put on by children that I have ever seen in my life.
If only they all ended with all of the pilgrims being burned alive.
Everyone, in case you couldn't tell based on that nugget of information, we are discussing Addams Family Values. And Joe, I gotta say, you didn't give any inflection on the Malibu Barbie.
Malibu. I'm a ballerina.
What about Debbie?
That actually was my other quote, was what about Debbie? And then I was like, I can't have all three be about Debbie.
But honestly, though, it's either Debbie or Wednesday. Like, those are your two, secret weapons. They're just, like, the best part of this film. But, yeah, everyone, we're kind of doing this to kind of tie in with American Thanksgiving.
Not to be confused with Canadian Thanksgiving. That was a month ago.
That's so weird to me.
It's one of the few calendar configurations that don't, really line up. Usually you have a holiday and we have one, and maybe it's named slightly differently, but this is, the weird one out.
I mean, I don't even know what your Thanksgiving is, to be honest. I don't know what it entails. So you'll have to, maybe we'll do a mini-sode on that, Canadian education of Thanksgiving.
Oh, God. No, it's boring. Also, I don't actually like to give airtime to Thanksgiving at all because it's a made-up holiday that is, to me, tantamount to, Valentine's Day. It's an opportunity for people to sell you shit.
It's definitely different in Canada because I don't know what we're getting sold in America for Thanksgiving other than a turkey.
When does Black Friday start, Trace?
Oh, but that's not because of Thanksgiving. I mean, I know it's always whatever. It doesn't matter.
And check for me.
It's okay. Okay. Well, everyone, let's bring in a guest on this because it's no secret that I love this movie, and we're gonna see how Joe feels about it. So we're gonna bring in a third one to be a tiebreaker in case it's a battle. So everyone, he is the creator and host of the YouTube channel Nick Says Boo, which features him reacting to anything and everything that is horror related in a wonderfully gay fashion. Please welcome Nick.
Hi. A wonderfully gay fashion. I love that.
That's rude. Did you write that, Nick, or did Trace make that up?
If it's rude, it came from Trace.
Okay.
It's not rude.
That is, yes.
It's wonderfully, spectacularly gay fashion. That's fine.
Oh, it's very gay. No,
gay
you're
is
on
a
the right
sin,
track.
remember?
Well, it's immoral family values, which this movie is, of course, directly commenting on.
Accurate, but yes, the channel is very gay, and so is this movie, by the way.
Yes.
This movie is very gay.
Nick, first, welcome to Addams Family Values. Why did you want to talk about this movie?
So, out of the list that you gave me, this one jumped out at me because growing up, I lived with my grandpa when I was a kid, and we used to bond over, we always watched the old sitcoms. So it was very WandaVision in that way. So we were always watching, Brady Bunch and The Honeymooners, and we watched the Munsters a lot. So I've seen a bunch of episodes of the original Addams Family, but we were kind of more towards the Munsters. But then the movie came out, and that spoke to me more than the original sitcom. So my grandpa has passed, but this is like for instance, this movie and the Brady Bunch movie, they're just kind of something that for me reminds me of him and connects me with him when I'm watching it. So that's why I had to pick this one.
That's sweet.
Well, I'm actually surprised. Truth be told, I think my introduction to the Addams Family was, there was a 90s cartoon that aired. It was kind of in the same path of the Beetlejuice cartoon that was airing around the same time. So I never watched the original show, and then I saw this movie. To the point where, because there wasn't a 2 in it, I didn't know this was a sequel and that there was a first movie until I was probably in high school.
No, that's actually a thing that, like, a lot of people have that issue, because I remember growing up, whenever I would have my mom go to, we had Family Video and Hollywood Video, and whenever she would go there and I'd be like, get me Addams Family, I meant Addams Family Values. And she would always bring back every single time the first one, and she's like, I didn't know that there was a second one. And I was like, it's the one that's not called the Addams Family.
The one that's next to it in the video store, maybe?
Exactly.
Maybe.
Well, Joe, did you have what was your connection to, I mean, besides these movies, with this property? Because, yeah, I mean, I honestly don't think I've ever seen a single episode of the 60s TV show.
Yeah, I haven't either. I knew it existed because when the movies came out, it was very much, oh, this is based on the famous TV show. And I think my parents had maybe watched it because my relationship to this, as I think mentioned on the outro of last week's episode, is that my dad bought the VHS of the first film because it was one of those like $5 extra purchases you could do at McDonald's. So like that's how I got Batman Returns, and that's how I got this. But I was always very much a big fan of that first film and not so much the second film. Like, it just wasn't in heavy rotation because I didn't have the VHS tape of it. So it's funny that the two of you were very much Values fans, whereas I was just like, oh yeah, I watched the original a million times.
Are you a big fan of the original? Like, do you really, really, like, is it that one you just loved growing up?
I think they're both really, really good films. I didn't appreciate how smart the humor is. I was in it for the sight gags, but now I recognize, the scripts are often very witty.
I think that's one of the things for me, though, is there's a lot. Nick, I'm glad you brought up the Brady Bunch, too, because I actually like in both of these movie franchises, they're very similar. You have your first film that, based on a TV show, does really well critically and commercially, and they're like, cool, let's greenlight a sequel right away. And the sequel, well, in this case, the sequel gets better reviews, not in the Brady Bunch's case, but both of them do shit business, and then that's the end of it. But I think historically, this film is maybe more highly regarded because it doubles down on the camp factor, and of course, everything Joan Cusack does in this movie.
Right, which is also the camp factor.
Yeah.
There's literal camp, and then also camp, courtesy of Joan Cusack.
I saw a quote online that was like, the first film, there was a lot more subtext, but with the second film, the subtext rapidly became the text.
Well, that's kind of the thing, though. I mean, I promise I'll stop talking about the Brady Bunch movies. I just fucking love them so much. But, both Values and A Very Brady Sequel, it's not just, the camp, but they really double down on the innuendos to the point where both of those movies, this and Brady Bunch, were movies that my sister and I watched all the time. And there's so many sex jokes in both of these movies.
Oh, yeah.
That I did not appreciate until I was older. I'm sorry, I didn't understand until I was older.
Sure, yeah.
Well, okay, unfortunately, I don't have a giant Addams Family primer for this episode, but just a really quick thing, in case you didn't know. The Addams Family is a fictional family created by American cartoonist Charles Addams. They originally appeared in a series of 150 unrelated single-paneled cartoons, about half of which were originally published in The New Yorker, over a 50-year period from their inception in 1938. The Addamses are a satirical inversion of the 20th century American family, an odd, wealthy, aristocratic clan who delight in the macabre and are seemingly unaware or unconcerned that other people find them bizarre or frightening. I actually didn't know that. I thought that these movies invented the whole thing where we're putting this kooky family in the real world and everyone around them is like, what's going on with them?
Yeah, I think that's meant to be part of the appeal, right? Because so much of the humor comes from the fact that everyone is just constantly afraid of them or they don't know what to do with them. And the Addams are like, what are you talking about? We're just over here living our lives.
I like that, both in both of these films, the Addams Family and the Brady Bunch, the fact that everybody around, it's like they plucked them directly out of the TV show and dropped them into the real world, and everybody's thinks that they're weird. But what I like about it is that it's sort of it bleeds into the real world a little bit, especially with this film. There's obviously things in here that, a disembodied hand, but that people are seeing and they're not like really reacting to.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a lot of like over the top stuff. There's a lot of like supernatural stuff too. I mean, it's very what would be the word that I would use? Understated, I guess, in some of the scenes. But I like the blending of the realities.
Yeah,
that they do.
it's just like matter of fact. Like these things that should be freaking people the fuck out. They're kind of like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, so the family itself, obviously, so we have Gomez and Morticia, their children Wednesday and Pugsley, close family members Uncle Fester and Grandmama, the butler Lurch. A character that is not in these films is Pugsley's pet octopus Aristotle, and added later. So Thing was actually added in the 50s, and I never knew this. Did y'all know that the disembodied hand, like just the hand, was invented for these movies?
No,
That
I
did
didn't.
not know.
So here's the thing. Thing in 1954 was originally a whole creature who has always been in the background watching the family, but was quote unquote too horrible to see in person. So the only part of it that was tolerable was its human hand. And so for these films, rather than have this creature hiding in the shadows all the time, they just said, well, let's just make it a disembodied hand that walks around. And therefore, this version of Thing was born.
Wow.
But yeah, we have a couple things like Gomez's cousin It, Morticia's pet lion Kitty Cat was introduced in 1964, and then Pubert Addams was added for this movie. But of course, Pubert was meant to be the original name for Pugsley, but the New Yorker would not allow that name because it was deemed obscene.
Which I love because it's obviously derived from the word puberty, which is not a dirty or obscene word.
Unless you want to go with pubic.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Pubic.
Okay.
You're
boys.
right. I mean, like pubert, like again, just one more syllable, E. But yeah,
Mhm.
I think that the 1930s, the New Yorker was just like,
Fair. It's a highbrow publication, folks. Come on.
So, interestingly enough, though, like the reason this movie got made and how this movie got made, there's not really much to it because it's simply the first one made a boatload of cash and they were like, fuck, let's make a sequel. So, I actually really want to go quickly into how this first one got made and what happened with it. Because, admittedly, I've only seen the first movie twice. Once about in the last 10 years, and then I watched it again yesterday, double featuring it with this movie, just to see how they actually compared when held up back to back.
Mm-hmm.
So, Scott Rudin, a development executive at 20th Century Fox, pitched to the studio an adaptation of Charles Addams' cartoon, The Addams Family. And Fox enthusiastically agreed that the cartoons would make a good film and set out to purchase the rights. However, they were bummed to find out that the rights were already sold, and they were owned by one Orion Pictures. They refused to sell the property because they were planning on producing a rebooted TV series. And also, crucial property rights were owned by Charles Addams' widow. So another difficulty in getting the film produced was the relative obscurity of the original 1964 TV series, because Nick, as you already kind of like clued us in, The Munsters was much more popular because it was syndicated and The Addams Family was not. And that's why I haven't seen it.
Right.
So the production finally moved forward when Addams' widow sold the remaining rights to Orion, who put the film in production with Rudin producing. The original director, and Joe, this is like the second movie in a month that we've had this. They wanted Tim Burton to direct this movie.
Of course they did. This is a perfect fit for his aesthetic.
Yep, but he was busy filming Batman Returns, so he had to pass on it. And that, again, everyone, if you haven't listened, the last movie he was meant to direct was Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, but he couldn't do that because he was filming Beetlejuice at the same time.
It's so funny, too, then, that he gets his kick at the can at this property because he's executive producing and directing a bunch of Wednesday episodes for Netflix.
Which I believe dropped the same day this episode drops.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Mere coincidence that we timed that because we were just timing it with Thanksgiving, everyone, which I'm assuming is what Netflix was doing.
When
too.
they announced that Wednesday was coming out, it was funny because like growing up, so many people around me thought that Tim Burton directed these movies. Like the same thing with A Nightmare Before Christmas. So when they announced Wednesday and that Tim Burton was doing it, they're like, "Oh my God, it's going to be just like the movies." It's like it's been so long. I'm like, he didn't direct the movies.
It's interesting though because I've seen many people flippantly refer to the first movie as Tim Burton light, and
right.
I can kind of see it. But honestly, and we'll get to Mr. Sonnenfeld in a minute, but that was his directorial debut, and honestly, I think he pulls that movie off really fucking well.
Oh yeah.
I think it has more energy than your average Tim Burton film, or at least the ones that he was doing at the time. He doesn't move the camera this way.
Yes, but the reason for that, though, is that Barry Sonnenfeld got his start as a cinematographer. So, well, actually, I'm bearing the lead here. Okay, so...
Yeah, sorry, keep going.
No, you're good. All right, so after Tim Burton, they wanted Terry Gilliam to do it, but he turned it down. So...
Ooh, that would have been such a different movie.
It would have been weird, and I don't think it would have... Well, he's not writing it, but, like, yeah, it would have been... These movies have a lot of style, but I think that Gilliam might have made it a bit more style over substance.
I think it would have been less accessible to a mainstream audience because he would have done the kooky, but it wouldn't have been in a mass market way.
Oh my God. Are you saying kooky because of the theme song?
Sure.
They're kooky and they're spooky. Okay. So they turned to first-time director Barry Sonnenfeld, and they trusted him because he had previously served as the DP for several major films, like the Coen Brothers' Blood Simple and Raising Arizona, as well as Rob Reiner's When Harry Met Sally and his Stephen King adaptation Misery. So he's kind of got all the genres cornered in the films he has shot. But the Addams Family had a very troubled production. In the last 3 months of production, the DP for that film, Owen Roisman, quit and was replaced by Gail Tattersall. Filming resumed, but within weeks, she was rushed to the hospital, halting production while Sonnenfeld took over cinematography while simultaneously having to direct the film. Further delays occurred when a blood vessel in actor Raul Julia's eyes burst, leading the production to film around Julia until he recovered. Then Sonnenfeld's wife became sick, completely halting the production.
Cursed set.
Yeah. As if this wasn't enough. Another difficulty was the financial decline of the original production studio, Orion Pictures, who, while having recently made the big hits like Silence of the Lambs and Dances with Wolves, had also produced several major flops, which ate up the studio's funds. So... about 2/3 of the way into production, they said, well, we're just going to sell the Addams Family. And they sold it to Paramount. In exchange, Paramount got domestic rights, and Orion had pre-sold the foreign rights to Columbia TriStar. But part of Orion's motivation to sell the first Addams Family was because it was originally budgeted at $25 million and had already gone $5 million over budget due to all the issues I already mentioned, but also the newly added material as a result of numerous rewrites. So, with a projected release date that was going to be competing with Steven Spielberg's Hook, Orion feared that the Addams Family would be another expensive flop and decided to cut their losses. So, this kind of happened in secret. The filmmakers were unaware that Paramount had taken over production.
Surprise, you've got new bosses.
It is wild. They learned of the sale from a journalist rather than either of the studios.
Ooh, that is bad form.
Maybe they're just like, they're busy, like we don't want to bother them.
Just keep making the movie. We need to sell it.
Ironically, though, the Addams Family was a huge hit, grossing $113 million domestically and $78 million internationally for a worldwide gross of $191 million, again, against a final production budget of $30 million. So, yeah, Paramount obviously greenlit a sequel right away, but with a different writer, kind of. So again, as I said, they were doing a lot of rewrites on that first movie. So the first one is credited to screenwriters Caroline Thompson and Larry Wilson, but I guess, I don't know who wasn't happy with the script, but they just kept tweaking it. So they brought in Paul Rudnick as a script doctor to work on the script. And Scott Rudin brought him in because they had worked together on Sister Act in 1987, but Rudin thought he kind of owed Rudnick something because creative differences made Rudnick asked to be credited with a pseudonym on the Sister Act script. So oh my God, what's it called?
He Alan Smithied it?
Yes, thank you. He Alan Smithied it. So Rudin's like, hey, just come in here and work on this Addams Family script while we film this movie. And that's what he was doing. So he was constantly, it's a Scream situation here where he was like constantly rewriting things and adding new scenes and whatever as they were filming this movie.
By which you mean Scream 2, because Scream 1 had a fine script.
Yes. Scream 2 and Scream 4.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so he was like, hey, you did such a good job with this horrible production on the first Addams Family, so why don't we just give you the reins for the sequel? And that's exactly what happened.
Wise decision.
Well, it's interesting, Trace, because, I encouraged you to rewatch the first one because you seem to be far less enthusiastic about it. And for the purposes of our conversation, I was like, let's try to be generous to it, or at least fair. And you kept messaging me like, oh, I think the second one is far and above, like way, way better, way stronger, more confident. And I don't disagree, but I also don't think that first film, like, you wouldn't really know that it had that many issues on the surface, because I do think it all kind of comes together reasonably well.
Oh, it does. And make no mistake, I don't dislike the first movie. I mean, I think when I rewatched it, I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Like, I think it's really solid. If it sometimes feels a bit episodic as we're kind of going through like the motions, and I don't know how to explain it. Nick, have you seen the first one recently?
Not recently. I just I agree. I like the first one, but the first one, it's a little bit drier for me, and the storyline with Fester is not my favorite. It struggles to hold my attention. I like how they balance Fester out in the second one. I saw something that kind of said, like, the first one, it might have been actually the director, he said, like, the first one was more the romantic film, whereas this one is more the comedy film, which is probably why I liked it more growing up.
Right.
I think for me, personally, I don't find Fester that compelling as a character. Broad strokes, I mean, like, I think the first film is very solid. I think it's very well made. And I belly laughed several times during that movie, mostly from lines coming out of Christina Ricci or Angelica Houston's mouths. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I do think that, and I can't explain why the second one works better in this regard, but it's kind of a thing where once you get the shtick of what we're doing, like, oh, like, you know, they just make constant jokes about like morbid things all the time. It somehow for me felt like it was getting older quicker in that first movie, whereas it doesn't happen that way for me in the second movie. However, I will cop to the fact that it may be because I have seen this movie 1,000 times.
Right. Yeah, that never hurts. I think one of the things we're also dancing around a little bit is that with the benefit of a sequel is that you've already established all the characters, so you don't have to do those introductions, which means all of those big moments where you get to see people reacting to the Addamses is happening either at Camp Chippewa, so you're getting all of these fantastic interactions between Wednesday and Mercedes McNabb's Amanda, or it's Joan Cusack just sort of vamping and camping it up. And obviously, I think we're all in agreement that she's the not-so-secret MVP of this film, and because she's partnered with what's kind of the least interesting of the Addams, like, she really does give Fester a boost, as you suggested, Nick.
Yeah, and I think, too, it's just like the villains of the first movie aren't as diabolical as the villains in, I mean, really villain. I mean, we can put the Grangers of the camp in with that, but it really is Joan Cusack. But I also think that the humor in this movie, it goes a bit harder and it is a bit darker. Like, it's more mean-spirited, but like in a fun way, whereas I feel like the first one, it's holding back just a little bit. And I probably wouldn't feel that way if the second one didn't exist.
I feel like the darkest joke that I can remember from the first one is the scene where Wednesday and Pugsley are like murdering each other on stage and spraying everybody with the blood. Yes. Whereas Values, as I was I rewatched it twice for this. I rewatched it earlier, and I'm like, so we got jokes about domestic violence, jokes about incest, actual murder.
Yeah. I will say, though, I'm glad you brought up that scene of the play in the first one, because it's funny. We get two plays in each play in each movie. They not only just bleed everywhere in that school play, they spray the audience.
Oh, it's full-on Evil Dead.
Yes. Oh my God. Tenebrae when she's painting the walls with that arm. But yeah, so I mean, again, I think the first one is really solid. However, I would always pick this one to rewatch over that first movie.
I can see it, especially if you grew up with the second one. It is easier to get into. There are more laughs, and even I think some of the action set pieces are more spectacular.
I think that pays off, though, with Sonnenfeld, like, getting his, like, nervous Nellies out with that first film. And this is his second film, The Addams Family Values, but, like, it seems more confidently directed. Marginally. Because, again, like I said, I think that the first one is directed very well, especially when you take into account that it is a first-time director.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, okay. So, because the first movie had been so successful, the reins were a little looser. And apparently, as soon as they threw Pubert off a roof and no one objected, they knew they could pretty much do whatever they wanted within the realms of a PG-13 rating. When deciding the film's title, they actually took inspiration from a 1992 speech called Reflections on Urban America, made by then vice presidential candidate Dan Quayle, and in that speech, he controversially blamed the 1992 Los Angeles riots on a breakdown of family values in the nation.
What the fuck? It's funny, right? Because we look at that and that quote is just so egregiously false and outdated, right? And then you look at what politicians are saying now and you realize, oh, we haven't actually made much ground.
Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier. I'm like, we're kind of sliding backwards in the media and in politics recently. So I feel like values has become a lot more of a thing that we need to be watching because it's very reflective of society right now.
Well, and that's the thing too. So I mean, immediately with the title of this movie, we already have a political statement, even though it's a covert one or it's a covert one. But we're covering this film because there's not really any explicit queerness in this film outside of Queen Diva Debbie Jellinsky. However, I think you could argue that the Addams family themselves are the queerness. We have these family values that are being like degraded by these like whatever's going on in 1992. And we have this kooky family who supposedly goes against every single like moral family values thing that a quote unquote normal family would at the time, or now even today. And they're kind of the most well put together family compared to everyone else in this movie.
Mm-hmm. And that's literally statements that were made about the production, right? Like that's what the screenwriter has said is he made the film to combat those kinds of antiquated notions about what family values actually means by making the weirdos and the outcasts the ones who most honorably represent what we expect from family values. But of course, in the eyes of every other character in the film, they're like horrible. They need to be jailed. They need to be killed. They need to be ostracized.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, Addams Family Values was released on November 19th, 1993, almost exactly 2 years after the first film. So, they were like, well, the first one did well that time period, so let's just do the same thing with the sequel. And it did open the number one slot, its opening weekend, with a gross of $14.1 million. And it was released pretty much unopposed, with the only other new release that weekend being the Ali Sheedy star killer dog movie Man's Best Friend, which I think this was Thanksgiving weekend, which if so, that's really weird because normally you have like 5 movies coming out that Wednesday of Thanksgiving.
Right.
It went on to gross $48.9 million domestically, a significant decline from the previous film's domestic total of $113.5. It did gross $62 million internationally for a worldwide gross of $110.9 million. Unfortunately, we're looking at a budget of $47 million, and in 1993, no one really cared about international numbers that much. So this movie, while not a flop, was definitely considered a disappointment and merited no greenlighting of a third film.
Now here, I have a question about box office, because I've never understood this. Now, what exactly, like, what do you have to multiply whatever the budget is in order to break even and or make a profit?
It kind of depends. A general rule of thumb, you want to make 3 times the budget. But because the budget you see is specifically the amount of money it costs to make the movie. This is not taking into account marketing costs. And I think we just discussed something recently, Joe, where it was kind of like, like the general marketing cost is $40 million, which... Jesus.
Also, where are you spending that? Because it made sense when we were still paying to, put ad spots on ER because it was getting out to like 40 million viewers. Nowadays, it's like, what? You're putting it on some shitty website? Like, that can't be costing you 40 million.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so that's kind of it, Nick. I mean, like this movie domestically should have made, let's say, $120 million to break even. Not even make a profit, just to break even.
Which, in light of how much the first film made, they probably thought was a very solid bet. So it's a little shocking that this movie underperforms, I'm using air quotes, so badly, all things considered.
And so Sonnenfeld thinks that he blames the marketing for it because the marketing didn't do much outside of just say, look, it's more of the same. It wasn't really emphasizing the plot of the film. So he thinks that people were like, why would I go see that if I already had the first one on VHS?
Right, you got it from McDonald's for Christmas for $5.
I'd be curious to look at the trailer for both to see how it actually reads to the audience, because to me, this is just a very different film than the first one.
But that's the thing, though. So it is a very different film, but the marketing wasn't advertising the differences in this film. And granted, I think whenever we have the first movie, it's like, hey, we're adapting this really, really widely popular IP. I mean, not widely popular, but like well-known at least. Like people, if you didn't watch the Addams Family growing up, you at least were aware of like what they were. And it's like, oh, cool, like we're going to adapt this TV show, boom. But a sequel doesn't have that new shine to it, right?
Yeah. It's always the issue with a sequel. It's like, what are you doing that's different but also exactly the same? And you don't have the benefit of, oh, this is shiny and new, and you haven't gotten to see this property in X many numbers of years or even decades, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, nevertheless, people just weren't buying what this movie was selling. Although, I didn't find any video numbers, but I would wager that this movie did really well on the home video market.
Nick alone.
Yeah.
Exact. Well, not from family videos.
God damn it, Mom. I said values.
Every time.
I cannot believe that. But despite that disappointing box office take, Addams Family Values was well received, receiving significantly better reviews than the first film. So we've got a 74% on Rotten Tomatoes with an average rating of 6.6 out of 10. On Metacritic, we've got a 61 out of 100. CinemaScore audiences gave it a B+, so the word of mouth wasn't an issue. And that's compared to the B audiences gave the first film.
Oh, wow.
And over on Letterboxd, we've got a 7.4 out of 10. So this movie does have its fans.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those critically reappraised things where, or maybe even just audience reappraised, where I don't see anybody talking maliciously or negatively about this movie anymore. I think a lot of people are very much in its corner.
Plus, I feel like if you bring up Addams Family movies to people, 90% of the time, they're going to call out the Thanksgiving play scene. So I feel like this one... It takes up more mental real estate than the first one for people.
I do wonder, though, if there's... Because, Joe, I mean, there's a bit of an age gap between us. Not a big one, but enough of one to where it's like a little bit of a different generation growing up. So I do wonder if people who were born in the early 80s have fonder memories of the first movie than they do the second one. Whereas people like Nick and I, who were born in like late 80s, early 90s, we just grew up with that second movie.
Entirely possible. Yeah.
Nevertheless, this film was nominated for an Oscar in the category of Best Art Direction, but it lost to Schindler's List, which was cleaning up that year. And
like, how do you choose between the two?
That's kind of my thing. I was like, look, I get that we're just giving Schindler's List all the awards. And it's a great movie, obviously. But like, for production design, for Best Art Direction, like, I just, like, look at this movie.
Yeah, like I saw a kind of BuzzFeed things you didn't know about Addams Family Value, and one of the pieces of it was that they apparently change the wallpaper in Hubert's room over the course of the film to reflect how he's feeling. So it's like the vines on the walls actually become like less thick and sort of like dry out and desiccate as he's missing Fester.
I've never noticed that before.
Like somebody fucking did that because they were like, this is going to reflect this baby's illness away from Addams Family to more conventional. What?
It's those little things though, right? Like, I mean, like I've seen this movie 1,000 times, never noticed that. But even hearing that, it's like, like just that attention to detail that sadly I don't think really happens in movies much anymore since we have computers.
It 100% does not happen. I was actually thinking about that earlier. Like maybe not every frame, but I feel like every single scene in this film, they've paid attention to, whether it's something that's happening in the foreground, something that's happening in the background, the house, the facial expressions, the outfits, the sound design. This is a movie that exemplifies to me attention to detail.
Yeah, it's interesting having seen a couple of episodes of Wednesday because it very much looks like we looked at Harry Potter, we duplicated that visual aesthetic. It's like it's a castle with some paintings on the wall and occasionally statues. And it's not bad, but it's very much like we don't have this kind of depth of my eyes are roaming the screen looking for little details because somebody thought to put them in there.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I mean, I haven't seen any of Wednesday yet, but it's kind of the thing where it's like Tim Burton has had a look for the past 15. Honestly, it's like everything post Sleepy Hollow for me. Sleepy Hollow was like his last, like where it's just like,
so good.
I want the look of that movie in all of his horror films, but like, whatever.
Instead, we end up with Alice in Wonderland look.
Oh, yeah. But
yeah, I was going to say, when I watched the trailer, it gave me, what's the movie that was it Dark Shadows?
Yes. Oh, yes.
That's what the trailer reminded me of. So I had to readjust my expectations because I wanted it to be very much so like the movie. But
and that's the thing, because there's a sheen. I will say this: I don't dislike Dark Shadows. I think Dark Shadows is fine. I wouldn't recommend it, but like I was entertained by it. But yeah, there's a look. Like, if you put that movie, or again his new Wednesday series, up against this movie, it's just night and day. And it's also, film versus digital.
It is that, yeah. Like, this is what film and television does nowadays, right? Like, everything has a kind of, I don't want to say candy-colored sort of sheen to it, but it does. I found increasingly digital just looks too polished. Like, I'm missing the graininess of film, which makes me sound like a fucking Christopher Nolan or Russo brother asshole. And I'm sorry if that's the case, but sometimes it's like, I just wish it was a little less polished.
Nick, do you notice things like that on him? Because I don't always do it, but like, I'm sorry, I don't always notice it, but like, one of my mutuals on Twitter, he posted like screenshots of Hocus Pocus and Hocus Pocus 2 next to each other. And I was like, oh. Shit, you really can see the difference in like film versus digital.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know exactly how it works behind the scenes when it comes to like color grading and stuff like that. But like recently, for Halloween, for Patreon, I did do both Hocus Pocus 1 and 2, and I did them back to back. And I noticed that like, for instance, the colors in the first film felt more vibrant to me.
Yeah,
and it
richer.
Reminded me more of the 90s and of my youth. Because like, like I grew up with Buffy, and Buffy was very grainy depending on the season that you're watching. So I'm used to that aesthetic. And then switching to Hocus Pocus 2, it was, okay, it looks cleaner. The colors weren't as vibrant. There was kind of like I don't know.
It almost looks a little washed out, right? Like, it's neutered.
But like, to me, like, I don't know if it's like just a cheaper way to do it or something like that, but I don't know. It loses the appeal.
And again, for me, it's just worse when I see it back. When I see side by side comparisons, like I can kind of get over it as I'm watching the movie because my eyes adjust.
Sure,
but yeah, man, like when they're juxtaposed, it's like, ugh, blah, blah. But anyway, okay, so back to the Oscars though. So that was the only Oscar it was nominated for, but Angelica Houston was nominated for a Golden Globe for Morticia, much like she was for the first movie, which I didn't realize. So she was nominated both times at the Golden Globes for these Addams Family movies.
Lovely.
As she should.
Unfortunately, while it didn't win any of those awards, it did win a Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Original Song for the tag team track Addams Family Womp.
I will say, I definitely forgot that both of these movies end with a kind of MC Hammer-esque hit.
I didn't make it to the credits the other day when I watched this movie, but then I listened to the Michael Jackson song that didn't make it, and I was like, I can't picture this song in this movie. And then I got to the credits today, and I was like, okay, I guess I can.
There we go.
Michael Jackson, was supposed to feature a song, but it was rumored that they didn't go through with it because of the child abuse allegations that were facing him at the time. Apparently, it was a contractual dispute. However, the joke in the movie where Joel sees the Michael Jackson poster and screams in horror.
Oh boy,
that actually wasn't meant to be because I guess when they were filming, the abuse allegations hadn't happened yet, so it kind of happened when they were editing, and it worked out to make the joke even funnier. Also, I will defend Addams Family Won't because watching this as a kid, there were three things that we did all the time. We would rewind the Thanksgiving play and watch it over and over and over and over again.
Sure.
We would rewind the tango scene and watch it over and over again because my sister and I would try to emulate the dance. And then we would listen to the end credit song over and over and over and over.
So much insight into Baby Trace. No wonder you're so fucked up.
It's just, I mean, I cannot understate how important this movie was in my sister and I's development as film fans. But yeah, so for its legacy, it was nominated, but didn't secure a spot in AFI's 100 Years, 100 Laughs. But in 2016, James Charisma, oh my god, of Playboy ranked the film number 15 on a list of 15 sequels that are way better than the originals.
Which you would agree with.
I mean, I would say better. I think way better is insinuating that the first film is not that good.
Ooh. It's that way qualifier. I just can't get behind it.
Yeah, it's not. But okay, so why don't we talk about what happens in this movie? Because I'm not gonna lie, y'all. All of my notes are quotes.
I was going to say, this is going to be me reading through the plot and the two of you just interjecting with quotes from Debbie.
I have 6 pages.
Oh my God.
And it's primarily quotes.
This episode is now double, and/or you're getting the second half on Patreon. Give us money.
Oh my God. Okay, let's go. Let's go.
Okay. So we open the film more or less by reintroducing the Addams family. So we see the family doing a bunch of various activities. So Fester, played by Christopher Lloyd. I was trying to imagine who else could have played this role because I was getting so much kind of Judge Doom energy off of this character. I do think he's great, even though I don't think Fester is the best part of either film.
Yeah, again, like Nick said earlier, like he works better when he's being complimented by a bigger personality like Debbie. Like I don't find Fester inherently funny in either one of these movies.
Not at all. I mean, if he was not playing opposite of Joan Cusack, he would be the least. Well, maybe not the least interesting character of the film because Pugsley does.
I was going to say, that's Pugsley. Yep.
Yeah.
He isn't given shit to do in this movie.
Oh, you know what? I actually forgot to mention this. So the one big change, though, between films is they recast Grandmama. So they had Judith Malina in the first movie and Carol Kane in this movie. And I could not figure out why because all I got was they did not ask Judith Malina back. And Carol Kane was really good friends with Angelica Houston, despite being younger than her and playing her mother in this movie. I'm sorry, Gomez's mother in this movie. But like that to me is also an upgrade because Judith Malina, unfortunately, doesn't really get a lot to do and doesn't really have a personality in that first movie. Whereas in this one, Carol Kane is at 11.
She's killing it. I mean, she's Carol fucking Kane. So obviously.
Yeah.
I can't help but wonder if that's it. Like, I wonder if they were just a little underwhelmed by the performance in the first film. Though I will say that when Grandma says dinner's going to be late and then you just hear a cat meowing, I do laugh.
This movie also, it is more of a joke machine than the first movie. Like, it's like fast and loose. Like, boom, 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 joke, 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 joke.
I will say one of my favorite things about this brand of comedy, because as most people know, I do prefer less sort of wacky American comedy and sort of drier British wit. But what I really like about this is that it's so zany and madcap, but no one is ever reacting. So it's always the movie trusting you to get the joke. So it's zinger after zinger after zinger, but nobody is laughing or breaking or even responding. Like, so much of what makes Debbie work for me in this movie is that she is just rolling with all the weirdness because that's how the film does comedy.
I feel like the comedy in this film, it reminds me a lot of, not necessarily the same, but in regards to what you're saying, very much like Scary Movie 3, where as compared to like the first two films, which were a lot of like piss fart jokes, you know, the American humor, whereas the third one, it still had a lot of that, but it had a lot of the subtle stuff that people weren't reacting to, like, you know, Cindy holding the giant tub of ice cream, but like not acknowledging it. A lot of that stuff is present in this movie.
Yeah, I agree. There's just something like I put this in the category of movies where it's like you will not catch every joke on a first watch of this film.
There's too much happening.
So much. And again, it's like you're saying, Jay, like it's not even just like with the dialogue, it's also with what we're seeing. It's also very Clue in that way a little bit.
Yeah, it definitely repeat viewing. No, it definitely benefits repeat viewings in that regard. Yeah, there's always something going on in this movie, and the movie has that propulsive energy because of the filmmaking style. Like, this camera is on the move so much, so it's keeping my attention, and then I'm like trying to figure out what's happening on the margins as we're on the move.
Yeah, it's manic.
It is a little manic, yeah. Okay, so we've got, Fester howling at the moon. We've got Lurch, who is played by Carol Strucken, playing the Addams Family theme on the organ as Morticia. Angelica Houston and Gomez sit on the couch. Gomez is, of course, played by Raul Julia, who I don't think of him as a great actor because I wasn't really exposed to him outside of maybe these movies and the Street Fighter movie. But when you see what he's capable of delivering and the fact that he did die relatively early, it feels like the way that we talk about actors where they had that promise and we saw that shining light in them and it just never got to be realized.
Yeah, I've never seen him in anything but these movies because I've never seen Street Fighter. But he did do a couple movies before this, and yeah, he's on that. It's like that Brittany Murphy ranking of where it's like, imagine what we could have gotten from them had they just stayed alive.
Yeah.
Oh, I forget which movie because he died right before he was starting to film another movie, and it was look it up. It was a pretty big movie.
Yeah.
So it would have allowed us to see a lot more of his range and stuff.
Well, so yeah, I said in the first movie, his eye burst or a blood vessel burst or whatever. It wasn't just that. Apparently, and these are his words, his eye fell out.
Yes.
And he's popped it back in.
Yeah, I don't know if that actually means that he had a fake eye, because there's definitely, in that BuzzFeed piece, there was a story where Angelica Houston heard that it happened on set. So she went out and got googly eye glasses for everyone in the cast and crew so that he came on set the next day and all of their eyes were falling out.
Oh, God. But no, I love Morticia's delivery of, I'm going to have a baby right now.
Yep, right now. It's the first real zinger in this movie, because the rest of it is kind of like, oh, we're back in this family, these kooky people again. And then, yeah, it's like immediately we are off to the hospital. We've got Thing, played by Christopher Hart, smacking a baby's ass after like roller skating throughout the house. And
Chekhov's roller skate, by the way, that's going to come back later.
Of course. Yes.
Funny anecdote. So, like, there's the joke where the little girls tell them the story about the stork, and Wednesday's like, our parents had sex. I watched this a lot as a kid, never understood that joke. And I remember we had a babysitter once. I was probably like 11 years old, and it was like right after I had gotten the sex talk from my dad. And the babysitter put this movie on. And I had never understood that joke before, but now that I knew what sex was as an 11-year-old, I made my babysitter rewind this scene and play that joke about 5 times because I could not stop laughing at the sex joke in this movie.
Right.
I can only imagine her reaction.
Oh, I'm sure she was annoyed as fuck.
Oh, the movie that I was thinking of that Raul Julia was supposed to be in was Desperado.
Oh, no shit.
Wait, was he going to be like the Antonio Banderas role?
It doesn't say which role, but it says like he was literally hospitalized and was memorizing the script while he was in the hospital directly before he died.
Yeah, because he died shortly after this film came out, so this is technically his last credit.
Yeah, Street Fighter he filmed, but it was released posthumously.
Sad face.
Yeah.
Okay, happier things. So, yeah, we've got Wednesday, Christina Ricci, and Pugsley, who is played by Jimmy Workman. They're, doing shit around the house and that kind of stuff, but they get very apprehensive when Morticia and Gomez bring the new baby home, because they either believe that there's a curse that one of the two of them will have to die, or they're kids and they realize, oh, we don't have our parents' undivided attention anymore, and this is sad. So they start to think of ways that they can get rid of the new baby, who we will eventually name Pubert, and is played by Caitlin and Kristen Hooper. So, fun fact, this mustachioed boy is actually played by girls.
Queer aspect again.
Mm-hmm.
I was watching an interview with Angelica Houston, and they asked about, what was it like on set for the babies and stuff, and she said that specifically they picked little girls because generally, at least according to her, within the industry, they will prefer little girls because they're just naturally more well-behaved.
Right.
But she did say, throughout the course of filming, however long it was, she's like, they grew up. And she's like, so when we first brought them on the set, you could put the makeup on them, you could put the wig on them. They didn't do anything. By the end, that's when they got fussy.
They were not having it anymore.
Yeah.
I definitely forgot that we were putting makeup on a baby, so call back to Elvira again.
Which is always, patchy on the face. You can constantly see the regular skin underneath it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. To the point where I was like, are they administering this makeup to make this baby seem more Addams-like? Or, okay, yeah, sure. So, yeah, we get fun things like them trying to throw this baby off the roof. And, of course, Gomez catches it inadvertently, not even realizing what he's doing, because this is what we do in an Addams Family movie. And I did enjoy when, because of the way that it's made up, they treated it like it was Marie Antoinette so they could guillotine it.
Which he catches somehow.
Yeah, with a finger. A single finger.
Speaking of Hubert, now I don't know if you guys caught this or if you read it the same way, but when they're sitting in the hospital room and they're like, is it a boy? Is it a girl? Mm-hmm. This to me felt like very much so like a queer reading, and he's just like, it's an Addams. Like, it doesn't matter the gender.
Right? Yeah, no, it's just one of us. It could literally be anything, which of course we've seen in all of these movies, right? When, Cousin It shows up and nobody blinks because it's an Addams.
I mean, the Addams family, despite the fact that they actually are related, they feel like they, at least to me, they represent chosen family.
100%. Yeah, like, I completely forgot that Margaret was a character in this second movie. You know, she's married to Dan Hedaya in the first film, and he's one of the villains. And then when she comes back in this film and she's just married to Cousin It, I thought, oh, okay, wow. So yeah, literally anybody can become an Addams. It's not like you have to be born with a mustache or anything like that.
And that's what I actually love about this. And another reason why I never knew this was a sequel is because, yeah, there's no connecting factor between these two films except for the Margaret character. But she's the most interesting thing because, yeah, she leaves her douchebag husband to marry this It.
And they have a baby in this movie. And of course, it looks more like
Called
It.
What?
Than, I love it. It and What, right?
But no, I fully agree to that. Honestly, it makes me just wish that Margaret was in this more. I mean, there's no room for her. I don't know what we would have done with her. But I like that we just, yeah, she has this wonderfully happy marriage with this It.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, I haven't seen the first one in quite some time, but I feel like the scene where we see Margaret in the background, the other guests, there's the person from the first film that's like conjoined. I think you see that person in the background, but I don't know if it's played by the same.
So supposedly, I believe it's the same actors from that first film, but they don't appear to have much of any part in it, except for at this wedding. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so speaking of characters, we should probably introduce our MVP. So when Gomez and Morticia realize that they're never going to get a quiet moment, and Morticia's like, I have no time to go and like seek out hellish forces and join their crusades, we need a nanny. So we have a montage where we audition different ones. And yes, Cynthia fucking Nixon is the first one. So just more queerness here, folks.
But all of this is so funny. What can we do to prevent forest fires? Prevent them? Lights a match. I mean, I know that we've already mentioned how good Christina Ricci is, but like there was a reason they gave her more screen time in this movie.
Oh,
and
yes.
Holy shit, is she so good in this movie? Like this is, I mean, it's partly Rudnick's screenplay because he gives Wednesday so many good one-liners, but God, this deadpan delivery just rules.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's really interesting to see her comedic chops on display in this film compared to something like Yellow Jackets, where she is almost the definition of manic and over the top, but it's in a completely different way. But she's still selling the comedy so hard in that show. So you're just like, holy shit, she's really fucking versatile when it comes to comedy.
Nick, do you watch Yellow Jackets?
Oh, 100%, yes.
I was going to say, Nick, we will
100%.
revoke your gay card if you do not watch that show.
Anything with Christina Ricci, I'm watching.
Yes!
Although I have not watched whatever that movie is where she has a pig's nose or something.
Oh, Penelope?
Yeah, I have not seen that.
Penelope's fun. I mean, it's like a dumb kids movie. I always go for Black Snake Moan. Black Snake Moan is a really, really good
that's
movie,
a really good
despite
one. Yeah.
what seems like a misogynistic premise.
You know, speaking of Yellow Jackets, I thought the scene later on in the movie where she's doing that incredibly creepy fake smile. I will say that the casting in Yellow Jackets, they did a good job for the younger version of her character because
Yes.
I like when I saw her smile like that, that's exactly what I thought of, the younger one.
You know what? I wouldn't be surprised though if that actress like used this movie as a reference for that smile, which I do. I don't know if it was intentional, but it always reminds, because this comes out, what, a year after Terminator 2, and they also have, like, the fake smile Arnold Schwarzenegger in that movie. So I just have to wonder if Christina Ricci was watching Terminator 2 to do her fake smile for this.
I love that idea, even if she didn't.
Also, speaking of gay cast members, I during the delivery room scene, David Hyde Pierce is the doctor.
I did not catch it. I saw it on the Wikipedia page and was like, oh, okay. I guess maybe I had to go back and watch it again.
Well, it's so funny because when you look up this movie, they're like, oh, cameos. I'm like, but they weren't cameos back then because they weren't famous yet.
No. It's retroactive cameos?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so someone who is not cameoing in this movie, she is a proper fucking player, is our final candidate, one Debbie Jellinsky, played by Joan Cusack. She struts in like she fucking owns this play. She immediately gets the job, and right off the bat, she walks in, the film's tone changes.
Well, as you were saying earlier, Joe, like, she doesn't react to anything weird. I mean, like, when Thing jumps on her shoulder, she blows his finger. Also, I think it's really interesting that we have Joan Cusack playing sexy.
Oh, yes.
And not because she's not, but because that is not...
It's not who we associate her with.
Yes! And so that's honestly why I love this movie more, is because they give an actress like Joan Cusack, who I guess maybe wouldn't be your typical Hollywood hot, right? But she sells the sexiness of this role to where, I mean, because she's a femme fatale, and she makes this femme fatale role her own.
She's extremely sexy in this role, and it's such a big contrast because, like, one of my favorite roles of hers was when she was on Shameless. And it's so drastically different than this role. Like, she is not sexy in that show, and she's not supposed to be. So it's just a testament to her range that she was able to do this. Because, yeah, she sells the shit out of this role.
I will say, if y'all want to see her be kind of evil again, she's not the main villain, but there's a movie from the 90s called Arlington Road.
Oh, God, yeah.
She's the wife of the main bad guy, Tim Robbins, but they're like terrorists. They're both terrorists who are moving into this neighborhood. She's really good in it. But anyway, yeah, this movie, also, I know we get the reference later, but I love that she, the model for her wig is Kathy Lee Gifford.
Right?
And it's only funnier to me because my father hates Kathy Lee Gifford, to where he was like, that stupid fucking bitch.
Oh my God.
Because there was an episode of Raising Kathy Lee where they were having a guy on from NYPD Blue. And I don't know if y'all remember, but NYPD Blue was like, oh, that was the show with the nudity. They would show butts in that show.
Oh, yeah.
And so before one of these guys came on, Kathy Lee Gifford was like, I just want everyone to know, because we have this person on, we are not endorsing this show.
Fuck off.
And the guy flat out left. He didn't even come on stage when they announced him. He left the studio. And so ever since that, my dad is like, Kathy Lee Gifford's a fucking cunt. And
Whoa, okay.
And so I just love that we have this evil woman who's modeling her hair after Kathy Lee Gifford.
Well, one of the other things that I think is really, really important to making this character work is how much she stands out from the Addams, right? So Debbie walks in, she's not just lighter fared, like she has blonde hair, but she also wears immaculately white clothing throughout this entire film. So I want to give a shout out to costume designer Theoni V. Aldridge. She's the same costume designer as movies like Ghostbusters, Moonstruck, First Wives Club, Eyes of Laura Mars, and a bunch of like Broadway shit. So like she knows how to make this character come off as both like sexy, and she's very much evoking a kind of like 1920s or 1920s to 1940s femme fatale, as you mentioned, Trace. But I love that because this movie is so dark, the way to establish her as that femme fatale is to flip the color scheme so she is always white, whereas the Addamses are always black.
Which in contrast, later, like when they're at camp, it's the opposite of that. Whereas Wednesday and Pugsley are always the ones that are super dark, whereas everybody else is blonde and wearing light colored clothing.
Well, but that's also, I mean, again, this is all the commentary here too, because, right, so the Addams family is like, yeah, their whole black, morbid look is very much against what is quote unquote normal for us. And we have Debbie, who honestly would fit in with the Addams family because she is a serial killer. But she has this masquerade of what would be traditional good, quote unquote, family values in white clothes, in blonde hair, in all of this stuff. But she's the main villain of the movie and the most despicable character in it.
She's like the halfway point to me, whereas all the people at the camp represent the typical, societal norms, and then whereas Debbie, she's using the society norms to get what she wants. Like she wants all the money, she wants all the power, and all the fancy things at her mansion, but she's doing it like an Addams would do, which I think, like,
exactly,
at the end of the movie, which is why she does get, spoiler alert, she gets buried. Like they put her in the family plot, and even Wednesday makes the comment, like, she wasn't crazy, she was just sloppy.
Yeah. that honestly, that's the thing, is where I kind of wish, like, I love her death in this movie, but I almost wish she had survived and like joined the Addams for the sequel. Yeah.
She should have been this film's Margaret, right? Because she does fit right in. That's actually the amusing thing to me in both of these movies, because the Addams, I mean, they never outright kill the villains in either film. They just kind of facilitate their end, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a bit amusing to me, if only because a lot of the time it feels like they should just be co-opting these people because they do fit right in. It's like, oh, you share our sense of, like you've been touched by the darkness. You want some... I think the difference is that the Addams don't do evil things to be evil or to get a gain out of it. They just like that shit.
It's normal for them, but they don't impose that on anyone else.
Exactly. Yeah.
They won't seek out murder, but when it happens in a cake, they're fine with it.
Right.
These Addams, man, where do you find them? It has to be damp.
So gross.
I think, speaking of when Debbie first walks in, like the very first thing that she does when she walks in the house is turn to Lurch and makes a comment about how big he is.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yep, she's making
There's
a dick joke. I like her.
Right off the top. And then if you didn't get that, she's sucking on things fingers. So, which is like, that is brazen.
Yeah, you know where the hands bend? It's also because its hands, its fingers, or its feet.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I mean, she's touching poo because that thing's been in the bathroom. Okay, so Debbie falls in love with the family immediately, or so we assume, and then Fester, spying on her, also falls in love with her. So that night, he and Gomez have this conversation where Gomez says, you know what, like, you'll have a wife and you'll have kids one day, and it'll be great. It's just like you're not ready for it just yet. Also, just in case you are not catching all of the class-based arguments that this movie is throwing up, the first line that I really enjoyed was when Gomez says, one day you'll get to feel the indescribable joy of having children and paying somebody else to raise them. Like, bam.
There we go. Have that line. I don't even remember that line. So good for you, Joe.
Yeah, I have that in my notes right under, you'll meet someone special, someone who won't press charges.
Right? Well, yeah, because when Debbie first comes in, she's like, isn't he a lady killer about
Acquitted.
Gomez? And he goes, acquitted. Yeah. Oh, boy. So Debbie is encouraged to begin working immediately. So she basically just moves right in. And that night we see her watching Peter Graves on America's Most Disgusting Unsolved Crimes.
I love it because he's narrating. He's going through all of her personas. Like it's literally about her, and she runs out of money, and then we get this pan or this cut to $3, 4 quarters, and a penny.
She waits a very long time, and then she commits another murder. I
will say, so I need y'all to tell me this isn't a plot hole, because I never caught this before. But so he says, oh, she kills them on their wedding night. And that's what happens. And then she disappears, blah, 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 until she runs out of money. She marries someone else, kills him on his wedding night. That is contradictory to her story at the end of the film, where it's very much, oh no, she kills them when they don't give her what she wants anymore.
I mean, you could definitely see it as a plot point. I could see it as it's a difference in perspective. So for her, she's like, well, they weren't giving me what I wanted, which was all of their money on wedding night.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah, she'd be the unreliable narrator. I'm not trusting her.
I often took it to be like she marries these dudes and then she doesn't want to have sex with them, which is what you would have to do on the night you get married, right?
That's actually the interesting thing to me, though, right? Because she knows how to use her sexuality despite having seemingly no interest in sex.
Does she actually have sex with Fester? Because it just, like, yes. I couldn't tell if, like, if it leads to more, she was just giving him a hand job. I don't know what was going on there.
I mean, sex is a hand job.
No. It's because that moment when he's like, ooh, which
that's the hand job.
I just thought she sat on him.
No, you can see her hand like going down to under the sheets.
God, his body is shaped so weirdly that I just like.
I mean, he's basically the penguin, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'd be curious to see what he was wearing under that.
Yes.
Right?
Because it looks like it's almost like the football pads.
Yeah, I wonder because, I mean, we know what Christopher Lloyd looks like. He's a tall, thin man.
Yeah, and the penguin's he's a bit more blocky than the penguin. The penguin's more of like an egg-shaped rotund. But yes, it's in the same ballpark.
Egg-shaped rotund.
That's what we need. That's how we're going to relaunch this, is we're going to do Addams Family v, like, Batman villains, and it's like whoever has the most dastardly scheme will win. Okay, so the next day, Debbie wastes no time at all. She immediately goes through all of Fester's assets because she's after that money, and Wednesday is literally camouflaged in the wall watching her, but I love that Debbie knows that she's there.
Yeah, like Debbie's not an idiot. Debbie's actually a very smart person.
Mm-hmm. She's just really bad at committing murder.
Is her blending into the wall, is that a reference to something in Slumber Party Massacre in one of the movies?
I don't know if it's a reference to a specific film or if it was just like a trope of some sort. Nevertheless, it looks fantastic.
To me, it's actually foreshadowing her role as an indigenous person in the Thanksgiving play.
Wait, how so? Just because of the body paint?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Oh, and I believe she has leaves on her, too, and feathers.
I do love, again, it's not even really a joke, but it's whenever Wednesday asks her, "Are you a nanny?" And her response is, "What a question." I'm going to start saying that when people ask me things. Like, what a question.
I love the way that they cut away from when everybody leaves the house and they leave Hubert with her. She's holding him on the stairs, and the very next cut to her going through everything, she's dropped the baby just on the ground.
Yeah, the baby's just on the floor. Like, you couldn't even put him on a couch or a chair or anything. No, just on the floor.
Oh, that's the other thing, too. So they try to drop the anvil on this baby, and she picks it up right before the baby drops. But that hole that the anvil fell through, again, Chekhov's anvil hole, because that will come into play later as well.
Indeed, yeah. We need to drop a cannonball through it later. Okay, so because she knows that Wednesday has been spying on her and Wednesday's asking these questions, she has to get rid of the kids. So the very next scene is her convincing Gomez and Morticia to send the kids off to Camp Chippewa for the summer.
That cost $20,000.
I died in this. $20,000 is a shit ton of money
Per
in
kid.
Today's economy, and you're talking about like what, 1993 money?
Yeah, that's like $40,000 today.
To go to the camp?
Yeah. Because whenever they're doing the play, Joel's parents are like $20,000 for summer camp, and he's Mr. Woo Woo.
Yep. Yes. Yeah, that's obnoxious. I went to a camp just like this. God, for $20,000.
So did I, but it wasn't $20,000. But it was religious, so it's probably like money for God.
Oh, God. Literally.
Literally.
So at this camp, we are reintroduced to Amanda Buckman, played by the one and only Mercedes McNabb. And folks, if you don't recognize her, she is from Angel.
And Buffy as Harmony.
Harmony Kendall.
Here's the thing.
Yes.
I really feel like Angel figured out how to use her as an actress. She's fine in Buffy, but she's just Cordelia's lackey.
Now, obviously, this movie came out before the TV show Buffy, but I forget when the original movie. I think 90 or 91 was the original movie.
Yeah, 91.
I did notice, I caught with the subtitles on my second watch, that there is a character, one of the blonde girls is named Buffy.
Really?
Yeah.
And she's in the the Buffy movie would have come out in 92 actually. But no, because Mercedes McNabb is in the first movie too as a Girl Scout playing a completely different character.
Yeah. I like to think that they're the same character and they just don't mention her by name.
Yeah.
Either that or they realize, oh, the tete-a-tete between Wednesday and this actress is like really good. We should, much like what we've done with Wednesday's role, we should just make this bigger in the sequel.
Yeah, absolutely. But also her tete-a-tetes with Amanda are so...
They're so acerbic and fucking, like, they cut. It's fantastic. So the other people we meet are camp owners Gary, played by Peter McNichol, and Becky Martin Granger, played by queer icon Christine Baranski. So again, I'm like, okay, we're casting nothing but divas and queers in this movie.
Well, okay, and again, we have more classism here. So we've got, we're the owners and directors here at Camp Chippewa, America's foremost facility for privileged young adults. And we're all here to learn, to grow, and to just plain have fun, because that's what being privileged is all about.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's the more explicit commentary.
I mean, again, I've never noticed that joke before until this most recent rewatch, and it's just so funny. And you have to wonder how many people watching this in 1993 are the butt of the joke and don't realize it.
Oh, 100%, right? especially the way that they're presented. They're so chipper and false. This almost feels like a vaudeville performance of its own, but they are caricatures, right? Like they are rich, entitled, privileged assholes. But it's not like there's only one moment where you truly ever feel like they are mean or could be cruel. And that's the moment when Christine Baranski goes, "Don't you just wish they would die?"
No, we don't.
that and later on when they're practicing for the play and Gary just starts hitting all of the kids with the little book in his hand.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, look, both of these people are horrible, but Gary is much more vocal about his prejudices against people. He is a mean bastard.
Do you guys read Gary as gay?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because now, I don't know if you guys have watched True Blood, but they were both giving me Steve and Sarah Newlin.
Right. There's even like an uncomfortable sexuality between these characters where I'm like, they be fucking.
Well, it seems like they should be siblings.
Or are they not siblings?
No, because his name is Granger, hers is Becky Martin Granger, which means that her maiden name is Martin.
Yeah.
Oh. For some reason, I default assumed that her first name was Becky Martin.
No. So he's Gary Granger and she's Becky Martin Granger.
She's his beard.
Yes.
Right. I mean, Peter McNichol has always given me kind of sissy boy energy. Like his stint on Ally McBeal was really how I first got introduced to him, and then I realized I'd seen him in a ton of things.
He is not gay, though.
Yeah, I looked that up. I was surprised that he was not gay.
It's just he radiates gay energy.
Yeah, he does. I mean, it's the voice. I mean, yes, it's everything about him.
He often plays these kind of like inferior men, right? Like they're dominated by women. He's a shorter man, which is like an uncomfortable thing for me to say out loud. But the reality is like short men with tall women immediately gives you that kind of like, oh, they're just not as much.
It's so funny. I was like, I knew him from this because I knew he was in Ally McBeal, but I didn't see that until I was like way later in life. But he's also Ghostbusters 2 was what I knew him from.
That's it.
Yep.
Yep.
And he's Renfield in Mel Brooks's Dracula Dead and Loving It.
Mm-hmm. He kills that performance. He's so
it's
good.
so
as
good.
Renfield.
I'm sure the movie's not, but he's good.
Yeah. So love is also in the air at Camp Chippewa. We have Wednesday making eyes at Joel Glicker, who is played by David Krumholtz, who looks exactly the same as a child as he does as an adult. It's very odd.
I find him so attractive, and I think
as a child or as an adult?
Well, as a child, I found him attractive as a child because I knew him from this movie and I knew him from the Santa Claus because he's the head elf in the Santa Claus.
Oh yeah.
He's giving like Peter Pan sex vibes in that one.
As an adult, I still find him so incredibly sexy. And again, he is not your typical like Hollywood hot sexy, but literally no matter what he looks like, I just love him. I love him so much.
Oh my God. How can you say this about the man who stabbed Kelly Martin in ER?
Dude, okay. We're going to have to just cover that episode of ER because we have talked about that episode like 3 times. Yes. Wait, Nick, did you ever watch ER? I mean, you might have been too young.
No, I've seen a bunch of episodes of it, but I don't know which one you're referencing.
So there was a really famous Valentine's Day episode where 2 characters get stabbed and one of them is killed by this actor who is a schizophrenic in the show. But like oh God, it's so good.
It's really, I don't even know if it's well done. Like it might be in very poor taste now because this was like a kind of late 90s, early 2000s thing about mental health. But the way it was shot was very impactful because you didn't realize that one of the characters who'd been stabbed was the person that you really cared for.
Yeah, because Noah Wiley walks into a hospital room and basically this guy's behind a door, walks out, stabs him a bunch of times, and he falls to the ground. And when he's on the ground, he looks under the bed, and the nurse who has already been stabbed is under there too, just staring at him as she bleeds out. And it is horrifying.
Was this earlier on in ER? Like, was Clooney still on the show?
No, he was gone by this point.
Yeah, I would say it's
like
I want to say like
maybe
5 or 6.
Yeah, it's around that time. I just remember that this was the episode where I heard my parents talking about it, and I was like, oh, I have to watch the show. So then I started watching ER after this episode aired.
It's a very like well-known episode as a result of all that. Okay, we also, back at the house, have Fester confessing to Gomez that he is in love with Debbie. So we're like moving along all of these plots, even though we are basically going to divide the movie in half now. So we have half of the action happening back at the Addams house with Fester and Debbie. And then we also have Camp Chippewa and everything that's going on there. So we get the first of many catty exchanges between Amanda and Wednesday during a life-saving exercise.
I'll be the victim all your life.
Is that your overbite?
Joke after joke after joke.
Just constant.
And meanwhile, back at the house, we have Morticia and Gomez going on this double date with Fester and Debbie. And, like, I'm sorry, did they go to an underground restaurant? Because what the fuck is this cave?
Well, it was freshly remodeled.
Yeah, it's remodeled. But I was like, is that the joke? Is the joke that it's made to look like a cave? Like, what?
I think so.
Mm-hmm. This dance sequence goes on for a hot minute, and I don't mean hot just because Morticia literally lights the floor on fire.
Okay, but I'm telling you, like, as a kid, my sister and I just rewound this scene because we just loved it. And what's funny is Jackie Dead Loving It has a similar dance scene that we also did the same thing for. I also do love the casual xenophobia. When I first saw Fester, I thought he was from Europe. You did? But I took a bath.
Wow. Yeah, I prefer the not at all subtle sexual innuendo when they finish the dance and all of the champagne bottles explode.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
See, I like the scene. Like, I find it entertaining to watch, but I will say that this is, for me, is probably the one scene that could have been removed.
Oh, fuck you.
Because it takes up too much time for me, but I do enjoy watching it.
What's interesting is, and again, like, double featuring this with the first movie, I was like, ooh, I can see more parallels here. There is also a pretty lengthy dance sequence between Fester and Gomez in that movie called The Mamushka, but it was cut down in the editing room. So I feel like this was like, we're not cutting this shit out.
Right. This is the longer and uncut version.
Yeah. But it's also, I love a tango. I love a tango.
Oh, sure. True Lies, baby. All day, every day.
Yes. Dancing with the Stars.
Sure. Yes.
I'll stick with True Lies.
I mean, that True Lies one is an absolute banger.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay, so back at camp, we have Wednesday terrifying the other girls with a plastic surgery campfire story.
Child May did not understand this joke at all.
No!
I never understood.
How would you? But it's another commentary on their privilege, right? Like, all of these girls are scared because they have all had nose jobs, even though they are, 11?
The acting on all of the other girls except Mercedes McNabb is so bad when they all start screaming. Like, none of their facial expressions change. Their mouths open, but the facial expressions don't change.
Tyra Banks just sweeps in and she's like, Smize! Smize with your fucking eyes, you brats!
I was rooting for you. We were all rooting for you.
You could use that other meme, which is like, how many of you were scared? Raise your hand. Everybody raises their hand.
So back at the house, we have Debbie and Fester confessing that they are both virgins, but they are in love with one another. A shout out to the costuming on Debbie here because she looks like she has stepped directly out of a Douglas Sirk film. It's this pink chiffon kind of nightgown thing. It's really, really pretty.
I love it. We're bathed in the moonlight. We have their silhouettes. Just like the Addams Family graveyard is great.
I love that it is next to the house. Like, it is their giant fucking house, this giant fucking graveyard, and then nothing else.
Is this a scene where Fester says, I'd do anything for you, I'd even pay?
Yes.
I missed that.
Yeah, and when he says, I'll pay, that's when she, like, swoons into his arms because she's like, oh, you're so rich. We also get a sight gag after this where we see that baby Pubert is outfitted in a Hannibal Lecter mask, so that's your pop culture timing coming into play.
This is the only movie where the addition of a baby has improved it. I love this baby so much.
Is it because they're trying to kill the baby the whole movie?
Yeah.
What is that?
But the baby also has a person. I mean, as we get to the end, that baby has a personality, and it's so fun.
Well, it's because they let the baby be a part of the plot. It's not, oh, we had a baby and then things changed. It's like the baby gets to become a proper character. When you allow a child actor to do things, they can be interesting. It's that most people just use the child as a plot device. Like, they're not actually a character.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, I just watched like screeners of Willow, and I was like, remember baby Elora Danan? You know, that baby had a lot of personality as well.
Man, I've been getting those emails, and I'm like, I've never seen Willow, and I have no desire to see Willow, so I'm glad you're going on that journey for both of us.
It's fantasy, and you would not be interested.
Yeah.
All this to say, Debbie and Fester immediately get engaged. So we send a letter to Wednesday to let her know, because this is how we kind of connect the two stories, is that Fester is sending Wednesday letters. We never really get to see them, and that's fine, because she kind of elaborates what's in them. But both Wednesday and Amanda are upset by this news of the impending marriage. Wednesday because she does not trust Debbie, and Amanda because he is marrying the help.
I would kill myself. I mean, the help?
And then she just goes into a whole tirade about their family, a bunch of circus freaks.
It's wild.
Yeah. This girl sucks.
Oh yeah, she's terrible.
Are we supposed to assume that Wednesday psychically sensed the second that he got engaged? Because she, like, wakes up.
Sure.
I mean, we're led to believe that there is some kind of connection between Fester and the kids at the bare minimum, hence what happens to the baby throughout this movie. But, I mean, it's one of the tricky things with both films is that Fester is so much the central linchpin of everything that happens in terms of the plot, even though he's not the most interesting character. Everything revolves around him.
I think it's more so, again, we're going into like them as a family, because as we will see, as the family is separated, bad things happen to them. So it's like when they're all in sync, they have a connection to this, so they can tell when something is off in their family.
Which is a fascinating concept. I guess I'm just most curious, having no exposure to the original comics, like, was Fester the thing that kept everybody tied together? Like, was he the main character that everyone gravitated to? Because I can't... He's giving me slight boring protagonist syndrome, not because he's actually boring, but just because all the other characters are more interesting.
Well, but bear in mind, though, so again, as Nick pointed out earlier, like, the plot of that first movie is like Fester, it's a Fester imposter or whatever. Mm-hmm. I believe in the original script, he was not revealed to be the real Fester. He was still going to be an imposter.
Yeah, they changed that last minute.
They changed it, and that's why they have the epilogue where it's like, it really was the real Fester the whole time, but the woman just didn't know. He had amnesia, blah, blah, blah. Because Christina Ricci, they had Christina Ricci as, like, her 9-year-old self go plead with them, be like, please, he has to be real. Like, it's important for the family.
Right. Which is a fantastic creative decision, because that whole movie makes you think, okay, this dude is an imposter and he's out to, like, steal money from the family, and then it totally works when he's revealed to actually have amnesia, because it isn't a plot device anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very smart. I like that decision a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when Wednesday rejects the attempt to, like, console her / make amends with Amanda that is initiated by all of these camp counselors and other campers, she ends up getting locked in a cottage with Pugsley and also Joel. This is where we get the Michael Jackson inferred pedophilia joke. And then later on they try to sneak away, but they're caught at the barbed wire fence, and they are tortured with a camp rendition of Kumbaya.
It's not the worst of it yet, though, because we're about to get some Disney.
But Christina Ricci's, when she, like, the song starts to affect her and she's, like, clutching at the gate behind her, I love the juxtaposition between her face and her body.
She's really good at delivering all of these one-liners. Like, she's so acerbic and deadpan, but also these little decisions about how she holds her body, how she reacts to things. Like, her physical performance is also really, really good in these movies.
I wonder how much of her, like, facial acting was restricted by the makeup, because I was watching interviews, and it was an interview with her, like, on the set back when this was made, and she was saying that, like, the wig cap that she had to wear was itchy, and she said the worst part, though, was the amount of makeup that they had to apply to her face every single day. And she was like, you could take a knife to get it off of your face. She's like, it was so thick and uncomfortable.
That was something that with Morticia too, because in the first movie they use, like, strings to pull Angelica Houston's eyelids up, but then they had to put strings on the bottom of her to pull the rest of her face down so it didn't go up with her eyes, and it was so uncomfortable. And every time she would move, the things would snap, and they had to reapply it to her face. So they didn't do that for the sequel.
God, these are the things that you don't even consider as you're just appreciating these performances, right? You're like, oh yeah, they're obviously wearing outlandish costumes and they probably have wigs. And yeah, the makeup it's lightening up their complexion, but you don't think, oh shit, they're acting with full-on prosthetics.
Like with Morticia and the light that they constantly have across her face, like you could always see the reflection of the light in her eyes as compared to everybody else, not just across her face. And I wonder how hard that was filming, just constantly having that light in front of your face.
And apparently with that too, so apparently Angelica Houston has in her contract that she has to have a key light on her face. Because one time they didn't, she thought she looked horrible in the movie. She's like, no, I want this in my contract every time I want a key light. So they just used that to the film's advantage, and they made it work with the character, by giving her that ray of light over her eyes when no one else has it.
That reminds me of when I met Jamie Lee Curtis, and to take a picture with her, she said, she had it on a thing that was printed out. She said, if you're taking a picture with me, if you have Instagram, I want you to take the picture and only post it if you apply this filter.
I mean, good on them for knowing their lighting and angles.
That's right.
All right, so let's do a bachelor and bachelorette party, shall we, gents? So Debbie is introduced to, we've talked about Margaret a couple of times. She's played by Dana Ivey. And yes, this is where we learn that she has had a baby with Cousin It. I just wanted to give a shout out because I didn't realize that Cousin It was played by horror royalty John Franklin, who is Isaac from The Children of the Corn.
Queer horror royalty.
Mm-hmm. So that was a cool little fun fact I discovered. And there's nothing super fun about Fester's bachelor party. I find the joke that they've killed the sex worker / stripper that we would presumably see jump out of the cake, and she just got boiled because we actually cooked the cake. I'm like, okay, it's fine.
Yeah, it's I actually find a lot of the stuff with Fester and Gomez, I'm kind of like, oh, this is the least interesting part of the movie for me.
But thankfully, they don't really spend a lot of time on it, because that was what I took away from my second viewing of it recently. Was like, same with you, Trace. I find the Fester and Gomez stuff to be the least interesting parts of the movie, but it never, it doesn't last very long. It immediately jumps to everything at the camp, which I appreciate.
This scene is very short, so thank God.
Yeah, because really what we're talking about is that entire first film, right? Like that is the crux of their relationship, is how they either don't trust each other, they need to get reacquainted, they miss each other, and so on. So it's like this scene drawn out to feature length. It's not bad, it's just never the most interesting part.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, how about we do a wedding then? So everyone returns, so our Camp Chippewa people come back for this nighttime all-black wedding. Of course, Debbie is the only one in white.
And they're playing Fiddler on the Roof as their wedding song.
God. So I do love the moment where Gomez wishes Debbie a happy life together with Fester, and Debbie goes, oh, I will. I will. And there's a funny little joke where Wednesday ends up inadvertently getting the bouquet, and someone just calls her a tramp.
Okay, I marked this too. Is this a drag queen?
Oh, that is Charles Busch.
Oh, okay.
Wait, who is Charles Busch?
I had to Google it earlier because when I watched it, I was like, that's a drag queen, I guarantee.
Oh my God. You're trying to trick me.
Apparently, it's let me see, Charles Busch. American actor, screenwriter, playwright, and drag queen.
I thought that was it because I never caught that before either. But yeah, if you look, it's like, oh, that's clearly a man in drag.
Which just really adds to the camp factor of this movie. We haven't really touched on it because Debbie hasn't taken center stage, and pretty much everything Joan Cusack is doing with this character is either diva worship, playing parts of femme fatales from like the 40s, or she is hamming it up so fucking hard that the movie just descends into almost parody of itself in the best way possible. But having things like all these queer actors, and also things like, oh, we just have a random drag queen in this scene, like camp. So we go to Hawaii for the honeymoon, and this is where Debbie tries and fails to electrocute Fester in the bath. This is a callback to a scene from the first film where, because he's been electrocuted several times, he can light light bulbs with his mouth.
Is this not a ghetto blaster, Joe?
This is a ghetto blaster. Although after that episode, I was like, oh, I think that's a totally racially insensitive / totally racist term. So
What is a ghetto blaster? Because they say that in Jennifer's Body, and I've never understood what that was.
Thank you.
It's a boombox. It's what Canadians call boomboxes, apparently.
No, it is an Urban Dictionary. A boombox is also referred to as a ghetto blaster. But yes, what were we talking about?
It was in Perfect Blue.
Oh, Perfect Blue. Yes, I'm sorry. So everyone, go listen to our Perfect Blue conversation to get that joke.
So Fester and Debbie proceed to start to get it on, and Fester confesses that he was advised by Gomez the following rules: no giggling or hand puppets. And yes, Debbie's condition to initiate the sex act is that he can never see his family again.
And then enter hand job.
Enter hand job, yeah.
I think before she tries to electrocute him, and she's like, I got the music. It came from the Time Life catalog, over 5,000 different songs. What's this one called? Number 438.
She can't even be bothered. I do love her sense of just kind of, let's get this over with at this point in the movie. Like, she is ready to off Fester, so she is done having to put up with him and do the charade. So, like, she's putting in bare bones effort, which is also why I think they don't have full sex. I think she's like, ugh, I guess I'll do the hand job.
It's the equivalent of, like, you know, when you're smiling for a photo, and as soon as that photo is taken, your smile just, like, falls off your face.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the first example of her just being like, I'm over it, is literally, like, her wedding vows. She's just like, same, or whatever she says. Ditto.
Ditto.
Oh my god. So we do jump back to Camp Chippewa so that we can have Wednesday hearing about Fester's deal with Debbie. So we're in the archery lineup, and this is where Pugsley kills an American bald eagle.
But aren't they extinct?
They are now. And then we watch the not-so-happy couple return from their honeymoon, and Debbie is clearly very aggravated that Fester has not died, and she's still stuck with him, so she makes him get a makeover, which involves a bowl cut and Miami whites.
Oh my god, the hair...
The hair is so fucking bad.
It's like it's giving Will from Stranger Things, which is a bad, and it's also in that American Horror Story Apocalypse. Evan Peters and Billy Eichner, they have that same, for some reason they have that.
Oh my god. Well, because it's like, she's like, don't touch it until the scab falls off, and I was like, the scab? Is this like hair plugs? Is that what this is?
It was probably a sew-in. My grandpa had a sew-in.
Ooh,
gross.
wow.
It's like a tattoo, but for hair.
It's like literally just sewed into your skull.
Well, how else are you going to keep it on?
Ugh. And he had like these he had it removed and he had lines. Ugh, don't do it.
Oh, that's rough.
Also, did you guys catch Ian Abercrombie as when she gets off the plane, that he's standing in front of the hearse?
I don't even know Ian. Who's Ian Abercrombie?
He's General Palpatine in Star Wars.
Oh, that's him?
Yep.
Shit.
Okay, I don't know how to transition away from that, so we're just going to do it.
Debbie says hi.
So we jump back to camp, and this is where we get confirmation by Joel, because he has a card membership called Murderers, Killers, and Psychos, and Debbie has a card as the Black Widow, so now Wednesday and Pugsley know who she truly is.
Oh, what's the Amy Fisher joke here?
Oh, I can't remember.
So basically, she's an American woman who became known in the media as the Long Island Lolita in 1992, when, at the age of 17, she shot and severely wounded Mary Jo Buttafuoco, the wife of Joey Buttafuoco, with whom Fisher was in a sexual relationship.
Yeah, it's a bit uncomfortable, because nowadays we would be like, oh yeah, she was basically being raped by an older man who was grooming her, and then basically it ended up with her, like, shooting him, and then she, like, served jail time, or she had like a criminal record and she became like a big public scandal and so on. It's like totally fucked up her life, basically because she got raped by an older man.
Well, she got 7 years in prison, but she was paroled in 1999, became a writer, a webcam model, and a pornographic actress, and of course had about 2 TV movies made after her.
Mm-hmm.
So for more information on that and our discussion of true crime and the morals and ethics of true crime adaptations, please head over to the Patreon this month to hear that conversation.
You know what? That was your best plug.
I was just going to say, that was a really good plug.
Didn't even rehearse that?
No.
Wow.
Just pulled it out of my ass.
Oh, okay. So at this point in Camp Chippewa, we learn that Amanda and her blonde peers have been selected to play the role of the pilgrims in Gary's Jamboree play, and all of the fat, disabled, and kids of colors will play the Chippewa.
She can't pronounce Jamal.
Well, aside from the one girl, I think her name was Chang, it's only the people of color that she has an issue with pronouncing their names.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. She's Mordecai, Yang, Esther, Consuela, Erwin, and I'm sorry, I still don't know how to pronounce this. Jamal.
She's just like, whatever. I don't
Whatever.
Gives up. It's funny because it's so fucking offensive, but also you're just like, this movie is absolutely cutting white privileged women.
Yeah,
just
it is.
Look at them. They can't even be bothered.
Happy, happy Turkey Day.
Kill me.
Eat me.
So bad. Okay, hopping back to the Addams, they drop in on Debbie's McMansion unannounced, but she's basically pussy whipped Fester so that he refuses to see them. That sex must be pretty darn good, Fester.
It's the only sex he knows.
This is true, yeah. And this is where we get Morticia's immortal line that she can forgive everything that Debbie has done to Fester, but she can't forget the pastels. This is also where we get a cameo from Nathan Lane as a police officer that Gomez tries to recruit to help them out, but he refuses.
See, it gets gayer and gayer.
Yep.
I didn't understand why exactly, like, she brings all of that expensive stuff into the mansion, but then proceeds to
blow it up.
That just seemed odd given her whole modus operandi.
I agree with you. However, what I will say is that nothing is ever good enough for her. So as soon as she has something, it immediately loses value.
Right. Yeah. Because she's always, I mean, she's very much a gold digger, right? She's trying to get to the next biggest thing, so...
In this case, though, she is literally a gold digger because she digs up Gomez's mother to get the ring out.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Which is the first clue that, like, she's not who she says she is.
But also would be a very good fit for the Addams because, you know, they end the first film by digging up relatives for Halloween.
Imagine if we got a legacy sequel with everyone and they just, like, have, like, a zombified Debbie joining the family.
I'm down
It'd
for
be very
that.
funny. I don't think they ever would, though, because it would be disrespectful
Yeah,
to
for
Raoul.
Raul Julia, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. We cannot skip past the line where they're moving everything in, and Fester's like, "Give me a kiss," and she said, "Give me a 20."
Mm-hmm.
Well, I even like in this police scene, I have seen the unholy maggots which feast on the dark recesses of the human soul. They're at camp.
A lot of big speeches followed by just like punchline.
Oh, like earlier, I forgot to mention this. When Fester and Gomez are initially talking, like they're like laying in the bed together, and right at the end of the scene, after they have this whole conversation about Debbie and like trying to, you know, woo the woman, Gomez pulls out what looks like a Playboy. They open this spreadsheet, and he's like, "Mom."
It's like, okay. Surprisingly sex positive.
Incest positive.
Well, you can appreciate your mother.
Yeah. That's a word for it.
Yeah, moving on. So, back at camp, the three outcasts are tortured with aversion therapy using Disney films, and also Annie, which I did not consent to because I fucking hate Annie. So, this was very triggering for me.
Wait, I'm sorry. So, you're okay with Sound of Music and The Brady Bunch, which I believe is the Brady Bunch TV show. Actually, Annie's not even Disney.
No, it's not.
Well, there you go.
It's all just like chipper things, happy things that the Addamses would hate.
Oh, I guess you're right. Aversion therapy. So we're already having queerness in here with that too.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. So it appears to work when Wednesday comes out and she, gives this very scary smile. Talking about Christina Ricci's physical performance, just watching this girl try to force the smile onto her face. So good. So she agrees that she will act in Gary's first Thanksgiving pageant, and when we see it, we realize it is extremely satirical and also horribly offensive. So I'm gonna stick with this side of the storyline and we'll come back to Debbie and Fester. So let's walk through what this stage play looks like. We basically see that it's presented from the position of the pilgrims, and they're very kind and welcoming, but also incredibly dismissive. And then Wednesday comes on stage as Pocahontas in appropriative drag, and she changes the script, much to Gary's horrified reaction. And I'm going to take a pause at this moment, just because this is the first time that the podcast has really interacted with Indigenous content that's this explicit. And obviously this is still not that explicit because there's no actual Indigenous actors in this film, but we are talking about Thanksgiving.
I think one of these kids who's actually playing one of the Indigenous people, it might be Indigenous.
It's possible.
But yeah, it's never like confirmed.
It's never spelled out. Yeah.
I also love that Sarah Miller's like, remember, these savages are our friends.
Absolute
Yeah.
mess. Plus, they still refer to them as Indians in this movie.
Yeah, they
versus
do.
Native Americans.
I do think that was a bit of a sign of the times. I can't remember when the dialogue changed. Like, we don't even say that in Canada. We say Indigenous people now.
Mm-hmm.
But just because Wednesday does list this sort of litany of things where it's like land was stolen from them, they were forced to move on to reservations and so on, I would like us to take a moment, and we're just going to address that. So I'm going to deliver a land acknowledgement for the three of us in recognition of what Wednesday says. So at this point, we'll acknowledge that the three of us are settler colonialists, and Trace is living in Denver, which is the unceded ancestral territories of the Ute and Arapaho peoples. And Nick is located in Chicago, which is the territories of the three fire peoples, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Bodewadmi. And I am in Toronto, which is the ancestral lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Anishinaabe, on lands connected to the Toronto Purchase Treaty 13 of 1805. And I want to thank you both for letting me do this part. Land acknowledgements, I've gathered, are not a common thing in the US. They're a little bit more common in Canada, but I think it's really important that we recognize the Indigenous people who have been stewards of the land and the water where we live and work, and they've been there for generations. They're still there, which is why we use the word ancestral as opposed to the traditional, because Indigenous people still exist. They're not in the past. So if folks want to know a little bit more about Indigenous people and the territories where you live, I encourage you to consult a website called nativeland.ca, or even reach out to an Indigenous friendship center in your area.
Yeah, I actually I knew the phrase land acknowledgement, but yeah, it's not something that I have ever come across in my 33 years of life. However, yeah, every time when I was looking up stuff for Denver, it seems to mostly function like museums and universities will like have this like as like a page on their website of their land acknowledgement.
Yeah, I've started to see it increasingly in things like film festivals even. So like TIFF does land acknowledgements before all of their screenings, which is pretty impressive. The risk is that something like a land acknowledgement can start to become a little bit rote, but it's a good first step for folks who maybe don't even realize, hey, who are the Indigenous people who live on this land?
Well, in this play, they really get back at him.
They sure as fuck do.
I mean, y'all, again, this is one of the scenes that we just rewound constantly because it was so funny to watch these horrible people. I think it's when the girl gets catapulted into the lake. That's the first.
Oh man, I'm curious. I feel like, because I don't have the nostalgic value that the two of you do, this to me is the scene. Like, this is the thing that people remember from this movie. But did you feel that way when you used to watch this as kids?
100%. Like, I would always refer to get the one with the Thanksgiving scene.
Okay.
but bear in mind, though, as a child, did I understand, like, the whole stuff with the Indigenous people? Did I understand what that was? Absolutely not. But did I know that all these people that were being revenged on were awful assholes? Absolutely. Like, Becky and Gary being roasted with apples in their mouths. I again, because we get the theme song actually more in this movie than the first one, but I love that they bring this theme song in whenever Wednesday lights the fucking match.
Oh, it's perfect. It's perfect timing the way that they do it.
And she smiles!
A proper smile, and it doesn't take much effort this time.
I want to know what they did to the benches. Like, they rigged the benches that they're all sitting on to, like, completely fling them off of it.
Every time I see this, Nick, I ask that question. I was like, what? I have to assume it's like an extension bench on the bleachers, and so it's like removable.
Well, because I was looking at it earlier on in the scene where they're like announcing who's going to be playing everybody because they're hiding behind it. And I was pausing it and I'm like, I don't see anything here. So it must have been something completely different that they brought in.
Well, I also love too. So, you know, we have Amanda's parents who are freaking out and they're pouring gasoline on this stake. That their daughter is tied to, but they are distracted when pies are thrown in their face and apparently unable to run on stage to go rescue their daughter.
Indeed, yeah. These parents are very slow to react. Like, all of these parents basically just sit there and watch as we light the entire stage. This whole village just goes up in flames.
It is, I mean, this is iconic. This is so funny, so cathartic, so entertaining. And what's funny is, I mean, as you said, Nick, this is the scene. However, I don't think the movie loses steam after this, and in a lesser film, it would have.
Yeah, because this is, I think, one of only 2 climaxes, right? Like, we still have to deal with Debbie, and she still has to do a bunch of shit. But the film implicitly understands that this storyline has also occupied 50% of the space for this movie. Right. We need to give it a good resolution. As a sidebar, I love that we don't know whether or not Gary and Becky Martin make it out of this because we never see them again. So I just assume they died here.
So it was apparently the reason we have the scene later when Hubert says hi at the plane to Amanda and her parents is because people thought Wednesday killed her.
Which I believed and wanted. I was super disappointed with that plane scene. I was like, come on, kill this fucking bitch.
That's child murder is a bit too far for PG-13, unfortunately.
Maybe.
You'll appreciate this. So, one of my very close friends, she is part Native American. I believe I don't want to say it wrong. I think it's Shoshone. But I asked her earlier. I reached out to her and I'm like, "Hey, what's your thoughts on Addams Family Values?" And she's like, "I love it. I love the Thanksgiving scene." And I was like, "Well, given you are part Native American," and I said, "Do you find it offensive? Do you think it was done tastefully?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm sure that it's very offensive to a lot of people, but I find it really, really funny." And I was like, "Well, what would you find offensive about it?" And she's like, "Oh, not the Native American side." She's like, "I feel like white people would be offended by it." And she's like,
yes.
The Native Americans, we lived.
I mean, look, I'm playing devil's advocate slightly, but you could argue that because Wednesday is not indigenous, that she is a white savior for this group.
That is true. That is true.
For sure. But I think it's one of those things where if we did have a named or recognized indigenous character in this film, and then Wednesday was still that savior, it would be problematic. I think, if nothing else, this to me feels like a baby step towards what we as queers are often like, oh, we want to see queer vengeance, or we want to see good for her moments. This feels like a reclamation of sorts.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I think that's one of the things that is surprising about, I mean, obviously, as you said off the top, Trace, we're covering this film in part because it's a Thanksgiving film, and there's enough horrific components in this movie to justify calling it a horror comedy of sorts. But I think it's hilarious that this movie has this standout sequence that everyone remembers it for, and as a result it has become a kind of Thanksgiving text, even though it's not set at Thanksgiving, and this is more like a pageant play.
Yeah.
I find it very funny that it is carved out this niche because of this scene.
I think if we had a bunch of Thanksgiving movies set at Thanksgiving that name Thanksgiving movies, right? Or Thanksgiving horror. Because when I think of Thanksgiving movies, I'm like, okay, Home for the Holidays? That's about it.
Yeah. And then for horror, it's Blood Rage.
Yeah.
There's, I think, a Thanksgiving movie, but it's super low budget and not very good.
Oh, Thanksgiving's actually pretty fun, but yeah.
The only 2 things that I watch around Thanksgiving that are specifically Thanksgiving themed would be this movie and then the Thanksgiving episode of Buffy.
Oh, which also deals with indigenous people.
Right, which is specifically, talking smack about the white people, as they should.
Is that the Chumash tribe one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's why, that's why I thought of the line earlier where she's talking to Giles and she's like, "We don't say Indian, it's Native American." He's like, "I'm still trying to learn not to call you guys bloody colonials."
Which also he should.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, the Brits need to be careful about that because they're by far the biggest colonial people in history. So, moving on. So, let's jump back to the action with Debbie and Fester and the other Addams. So, Hubert is undergoing a physical change, and he's becoming a quote-unquote normal boy because Fester is not there. So he's missing the presence of his uncle.
I just love that it's not only his appearance that has changed, but the entire decor of his room has changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is where the wallpaper shift is very noticeable if you know to look for it.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Debbie is basically given up being anything but who she truly is. So on their 3-week anniversary, she has packed a dynamite anniversary gift for Fester. She has gone out drinking with a bunch of sailors, including a cameo by Tony Shalhoub.
This is Looney Tunes.
It's wild. Like, watching this made me kind of sit back and say, wait, what are we doing in this movie right now?
I love that she sets it too. She just like twists the clock. It's like, okay, bomb set.
Yep. She just knows how to do it. She's just that good. Yeah. And as you said, Nick, she's completely prepared to blow up this entire house if it means getting rid of Fester, which means, of course, when she drives up in her convertible, it has not worked. He has survived.
Her laughing in the car is one of my favorite scenes of this movie because it's so over the top.
It's that... I can't do it, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
That was pretty good.
No, but it's a very distinctive laugh that is like impermanently ingrained in my brain. It's like, oh yeah, that's Debbie's laugh in the car.
It's so iconic. And of course, she's like dressed with the cloth over her head, the oversized sunglasses, pure femme fatale, but in white.
The shot, though, I love the shot of inside the car as we have, what's clearly a green screen behind her as this house blows up.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really cool looking.
Oh, this is all working, right? And I don't think we can praise Joan Cusack's performance enough for this. She is digging into this role like it is a 7-course meal.
Oh, it's so good. What is she when she's like, love you, you're a big dumb thing.
She can't even muster the enthusiasm for a proper insult. I'm just so done with you.
We have reached cartoon land by this point, to where the 100%. Fact that Thing is driving this car with just a hand, it doesn't matter.
It makes no sense, and you just go with it because you're watching Debbie get hit by a car driven by Thing.
Also, Trace, you should appreciate the Scooby-Doo reference when she yells, "I'll get you in your hand too."
That's Wizard of Oz.
No, they say that all the time in Scooby-Doo. Oh, there was something else. Oh, let me find my notes because there's another Scooby-Doo reference.
Nick!
It's both.
No, because in Scooby-Doo, it's I would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for you meddling kids.
No, yeah. Oh, there was another Scooby-Doo thing. I have to find it. Keep talking. Oh, actually, before my ADD self gets past that, I want to the scene that we were talking about a second ago where Hubert is changing. That whole scene is at least to me a giant condemnation on how parents will act when their child comes out of the closet.
Oh,
tell us more.
Because he's like, I can't don't do this to me, please, make him something else. I can't handle this. And they're like, he might grow up to become a lawyer,
right?
The president. So it's like it's the exact opposite of what they say. Well, for people who have dealt with parents who were not super, receptive and warm to them coming out of the closet. But that's exactly how that reads to me.
I really like, I can't believe neither Joe or I brought that up, actually, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But no, because you're right. It's so reading it through that lens, it's upsetting that they react the way they do. However, Morticia makes the efforts to go with what she's reading her Kit Kat in the Hat. She's like, well, this is what you want, so I'm going to do it for you because I love you.
Exactly. And then at the end, she's like, and the cat lives?
He lives. Meanwhile, Gomez goes into what's essentially a coma.
More or less, yeah. He starts to die.
Well, because he does that in the first film with Fester, right? Whenever he gets upset, he ends up in, bedridden.
Yeah, this movie has a dance scene. This movie has a play scene. This movie has Gomez going into a depressive coma until things go right. So it does repeat a lot of the same beats, but it's to the point where I was like, oh, the first one was kind of like a dry run for the masterpiece here.
Yeah, like it's their first kick at the can, and it's like palatable but not over the top, and then everything gets cranked up to 11 when we do it again.
Exactly.
So after Thing runs over Debbie with the car, it drives Fester back to the house, and we get this high-speed chase sequence. Debbie ends up imprisoning the entire Addams family because, of course, at this point, Camp Chippewa is no more. So Wednesday and Pugsley have come home, and everybody ends up in electric chairs.
I'm sorry, but Debbie apparently had time to stop at the salon before she got to the Addams family house.
Because she's got a fucking blowout? Yes, she does. She looks great.
She looks so good. And then what do we get? But we get a fucking slideshow presentation.
Okay, so here's the thing. I couldn't help but think, and I know I'm not the first person to make this connection, but you have to think that baby Kevin Williamson, not so baby Kevin Williamson, looked at this scene and wrote Debbie Saltz after this Joan Cusack character from Scream 2. But then also Sylvia Horta for Urban Legend had to write this Rebecca Gayheart slide presentation explanation sequence in the climax of that film. Because even in that movie, right, we always joke about Rebecca Gayheart's hair getting bigger. And this is what happens with Debbie's hair, right?
You're very correct. And of course, gay men, we pick up on that shit immediately. And I get why people would complain about the Urban Legend scene, because that movie is on a level of reality that the Addams Family Values is not. But who cares, man? It's funny.
I mean, this scene is great, not just because of Joan Cusack's completely unhinged performance and watching her react to Malibu Barbie.
Okay, wait, no. Malibu Barbie. I was a ballerina, delicate, graceful.
But to me, what sells it is not just her reaction, because if it was, it would just be, oh, this woman is bonkers, right? But it's the rest of the Addams agreeing with her as though she is perfectly sane.
And like super deadpan too, because she's like Malibu Barbie, and they're like, the nightmare, the nerve.
They're so sympathetic. It's actually why I am disappointed that she ends up dying, because it's so evident that she does fit perfectly in with this family. She just doesn't realize it because she thinks she has to have this perfect fake family like what we see in the home videos.
Okay,
right?
then let's apply a queer reading to this, right? So the Addamses are queer, and Debbie is queer, but maybe it's not like internalized homophobia she's having here, but she has never fit in with anyone because of her queerness, and to the point where she is like self-destructive in that she can't even see a good thing when she has it.
Yeah, because you get the impression that if she had just given them a light dose of the electric shock, they would have all been like, thanks, that was great. Let's go make dinner.
She's kind of a sad character because of that.
Yeah.
Because she just feels like she's just trapped in the middle and she doesn't know who she wants to be. And it's sad because she clearly has, strapped to an electric chair, this entire family in front of her that would accept her. But she's so caught up in what society is trying to tell her how she's supposed to behave.
Right. And you could argue, that society's restrictions on women are contributing to Debbie. I mean, well, not really, because she was clearly a spoiled shit ever since she was a kid. But... but it's still just like, there is almost a tragedy to this character. I can totally see it. And because it's a comedy, that makes it an easier pill to swallow for me. Whereas if this was like a serious movie, then no, it wouldn't work as well.
But I think it's important too, because Nick, you said earlier, the way that she's costumed, like her whole visual aesthetic and what she aspires to do is very reminiscent of these privileged assholes at Camp Chippewa, like Amanda's family and all that. If you think of Debbie as like that transition between somewhere between the Addams and the Amandas, what we see of her home videos makes more sense too, right? Like she aspires to have the wealth and the privilege that Amanda and the other Camp Chippewa people want, but really she's an Addams. She's been brainwashed with aversion therapy by a normative hetero society to be like, oh, I need to have all this shit. Whereas if she could just let it go, she might have actually fit in well with the Addams.
Yep.
But sadly, no. She tries to fry them, and we have this Rube Goldsberg kind of contraption sequence with baby Poobert.
Poobert?
And she...
Also watch it slow. It's like Mousetrap, right?
Basically, yeah. So she ends up getting totally fried, turned to ash, and all that's left is her shoes and her credit cards.
I love the hair when she's getting electrocuted. It's very like John Hughes, like Home Alone when he's getting electrocuted in the basement. But it was also kind of giving me like Cynthia from Rugrats, the doll.
Yes. Well, it's so funny too, because on the back of the VHS of this movie, it's clearly a publicity still, because it's Joan Cusack standing next to this thing with the hair like this, but she's not being electrocuted. She's just standing next to it like, look at me, I'm taking a picture for a photo shoot.
She said that was so weird to film that day, because she's like, I've never worn anything like that. And she said, and I had this huge wig that I could barely move my neck. And she's like, all the male crew were just standing there looking at her like, what the fuck?
What are we doing?
You just imagine her walking out of her trailer with that wig. And it's like, for what, 2 shots?
Yeah, but it's the climax, man.
Her entire wardrobe, like even being sexy. I meant to mention this earlier because, like, in that same interview, they asked her, like, what was it like trying to play like this sexy character and wearing these outfits? And she said that at first, when she was initially offered the part and was reading it, she was like, I didn't know if I wanted to do that, because it, like how we were speaking to earlier, she's not what we consider, Hollywood sexy. But she was like, you know what? It's dress up. And she said, I wanted to push myself. So she did it. And she sold the shit out of the role.
Thank God for that. I mean, whenever she dies, this will be like Oscar nomination for Working Girl, sure, but it's Addams Family Values that people are going to remember her for.
The range. Okay, so the disaster has been averted. We get a sometime later card, and Margaret and cousin It arrive. They have a new nanny for what? And this new nanny is Dementia, played by Carol Hankins. And of course, she and Fester immediately make eyes. And then we get this Carrie-esque finish where Joel is grabbed by Debbie coming out of the grave. And that's how we end.
I love the homage to Carrie, and I love that her gravestone just says wife and, in all caps, psycho.
It feels very appropriate.
I actually always feel bad for Joel here, though, because it's like, oh, he and Wednesday had something really good going on, but it's like, oh, no, she's just gonna scare the shit out of him.
I also love that he's dressed like Gomez.
Yep.
Yes.
With the mustache.
To the point, though, Nick, where as a kid, I actually thought this was another family member of theirs who happened to look like him.
Yeah.
He does look different.
Well, it's funny because, I mean, it's again paying homage to the first film where Pugsley went as Fester for Halloween in that film.
Yes. And that's because that movie ends with the tease, oh, Morticia's pregnant, whereas this is just like, no, we're ending with Wednesday because this movie knows that she is the other MVP of this movie.
Yes, and it never surprises to me that people end up singling out the female characters in this film because, like, Ricci, Houston, and, of course, we spent a bunch of time talking about Cusack. But yeah, I don't know if it's that they get more to do or they get the best lines or they're just the best at delivering these, but there's something very special, and I think it's one of the reasons why especially gay men end up gravitating to these characters in these movies, right? Like there's just something very campy, very sensual, very acerbic about these women in this movie.
Yeah, it's a thing where imagine if you were an actor, right? And you were going to be in this movie. And it's like, okay, you can be Gomez, you can be Pugsley, you can be Fester, you can be Lurch.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you cannot get these amazing roles because you're like, oh, I guess I'm just going to play like the kind of straight man, I guess, to these awesome, crazy women.
Yeah, I think Gomez is probably the best you can do. I mean, Fester does get to do a bunch of stuff, but as we said, he's often reacting to other people's larger than life performance.
Yeah, it's not a bad performance, but it's maybe not one note. Maybe it's like 2 note. There's just not much to him. Whereas I feel with Gomez, like Raul Julia is so animated. Like his facial expressions are so animated. He would be the only one that I would be like, yeah, I would want to be that character if I had to pick one of the male characters. But yes, as a gay man, 100% one of the female characters.
Like, I will put a wig on. Just let me be Debbie. Let me be Morticia. I will lose the weight.
Let me be that drag queen who calls Christina Ricci a tramp.
Oh, man. Okay, well, do y'all have any final thoughts on this movie?
I love this movie. I think that as a gay man, I identify with this movie a lot. And I think, I mentioned at the beginning of this episode that this, I feel like this movie is just very, very gay. And it's not necessarily because it has gay characters, because it doesn't. I mean, there's a lot of gay actors in it. But I think especially with the character of Debbie, specifically because she, to me, she represents... She's like a conduit, right? To allow, like inner desires and frustrations to be explored in a safe way. I mean, because she's obviously, running around trying to kill everybody. But it's done in a way that is so campy that you accept it. And I love that. I mean, she's not, yes, she's a villain, but we all like the villains. Yeah. We always gravitate towards the villains. So I don't know. She's just a very big example of it. I mean, and the same thing with Morticia is she's so prim and proper, but she just exudes sexuality. And in this universe, like look at the camp counselors. I mean, their outfits are horrendous, horrendous. Which is funny because there's even when they switch the scenes, and it pulls out of one of their asses, like the camera. And it's like accentuating how horrible the outfit is. But I don't know. This movie is super gay. I love it. I feel like examining it through this lens now to come onto this episode made me understand more of why I loved this and identified with it so much growing up. I just didn't understand why.
Well, I'm really glad for that. And I feel embarrassed that we have not mentioned this yet because I didn't pull this in my research. But so Paul Rudnick, the screenwriter for this film, his other big claims to fame besides this and Sister Act are the 1997 movie In and Out, starring Kevin Kline. Mm-hmm. He also wrote a movie and a play called Jeffrey that starred Steven Weber and Sigourney Weaver. It's like a 1995 gay romantic comedy film. But shocking no one, Paul Rudnick is an out and proud, openly gay man. So,
oh wow, bury the lead there, Tracy.
I know. I can't believe we didn't have that at the beginning of this episode. But yeah, so there is gay queer DNA all over this film.
I mean, to me, I think his quote that he said about family values and how specifically that excludes LGBTQ people was very telling. Like, and it feels like people just weren't as comfortable being on the record in the early 90s, right? Like, we were just coming out of the AIDS crisis. It wasn't a popular thing to be out, even though obviously we had tons of queer people working in Hollywood, making movies and stuff.
Right.
But I love that he basically saw an opportunity to explore that queerness, albeit in a bit of a, sort of subtle, I don't know, Nick, you said this is more text than subtext at this point.
I think it's more obvious now, though, than it was back then.
I think so, too. Yeah, like we have better language and we're more equipped to see it and recognize it and celebrate it and talk about it now. And yeah, this film, I don't have the nostalgic value for it, but I really appreciated the opportunity to watch it as an adult and just really appreciate it for everything that it's doing. It is kind of groundbreaking, and the performances, the set design, all of that shit, like it's just a really fucking good time.
Yeah, it's just very fun. Exactly. And hope everyone really enjoyed it. But yeah, well, before we announce what we're covering next week, Nick, first of all, thank you so much for coming on to talk about this, especially for a movie that you love. It's always good to have a guest that really enjoys the movie.
Thank you for having me on. This is such a like a surreal experience for me, being able to sit down and talk to you guys. So this meant a lot. So thank you very much for asking me.
Of course. And let everyone know, where can they find you and your work on social media?
So you can find me on YouTube. I have a reaction channel, primarily horror. Occasionally you can watch me crying to something like The Notebook, but primarily horror. And, if you want to check out more stuff, I do have a Patreon. It is also Nick Says Boo. Yeah, Nick Says Boo is the channel name, and it's the Patreon name.
Nice.
Well, good. Well, if you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us on Twitter and Instagram at HorrorQueers, or shoot us an email at horrorqueers@gmail.com. Find us on Letterboxd to keep track of all the films we've covered, or go to our YouTube channel to check out our interviews with various horror filmmakers, as well as our monthly hangouts where we talk about hot button issues with some of our journalistic peers. And if you want to chat with other listeners, please join our Facebook group for HorrorQueers. If you have a moment, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We got quite a few last month, so
nice.
try to top it this month, y'all.
There we go.
And if you want even more content, please support the show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/horrorqueers. This month on the Patreon, we've got episodes discussing the morals and ethics of true crime, as I've already said, the horror satire, The Menu, and we're playing a bit of catch-up with episodes on Barbarian and Smile, 2 big horror hits from earlier this year. And our audio commentary for the month will be on the sequel that's better than the original, The Collection, which will be celebrating its 10th anniversary this month. But Joe, what are we covering next week?
All right. Well, we're going to go even further into the past, dipping into some classic horror trace. Very excited about this one because I'm, as we know, a huge Val Lewton fan, and you have not seen this movie. So we are going to be talking about psychosexual desires in Cat People.
The original film, not the remake.
This is true. Yes, the 40s film, not the 80s one.
I have no idea what to expect from this, although I will say it is one of 12 films on Shudder's 101 Scariest Horror Movie Moments that I have not seen, and when I tweeted out, hey y'all, what should I prioritize? The first reply was, well, I just watched Cat People. Skip that one.
Oh, well, fuck that person, because this movie is great. And you already know what to expect with Val Lewton, because, of course, we watched The Seventh Victim. Go back and listen to that episode.
Previous guest Kay Lynch loves this movie, so I'm really excited to talk about it.
Yep. Lots to talk about.
Well, until next week, then, we can cross out Addams Family Values.
And cross out horror queers.
Atlas Avenue, a long stretch of road that encompasses everything the city of Kennett Heights has to offer. Neon lights, traffic, crime, the hustle and bustle of everyday life, and the craziest of characters. My office was above it all. My name is James Locke, and I'm a PI.
Hello, Mr. J. How the hell you doing today?
Good, Edith. Nearly every year I have a new case. New people to meet, new clues to discover, and new problems to solve. But I do it the old-fashioned way. No technology. Nothing post-1950. Hell, I don't even listen to podcasts, but you should. Atlas Avenue Beat is a spoof of the film noir genre with goofy characters, tons of wordplay, and non-stop raunchy humor. There's also 3 whole seasons out right now with more on the way. Just search for Atlas Avenue Beat wherever you listen to podcasts or visit us online at bloody.fm.